Alright, sorry about that. Uh, so that would be like what, like right?
To control
Hold on. So let's go
Westminster
back.
Abbey. It's true though that Richard's attention was often directed elsewhere. As a young prince, he was made Duke of Aquitaine by his father, and he had a great
Oh, yeah, so
struggle
that is
to
basically
control the
France.
treacherous vassal barons there all his life. In fact, he was at war with the Kingdom of France and its allies from his childhood to his death. His father, King Henry II, had spent his life establishing and growing his influence over
I had to go back in time and fix the story.
various duchies and counties through various methods, including his marriage to Eleanor. Historians call this conglomeration of lands the Angevin Empire, but it was nothing like a single state, a single kingdom. Each duchy was filled with powerful lords who were more like local kings than any.
Local kings. And I'm trying to like in my head compare it to Game of Thrones because I feel like it would like make it seem. I guess like yeah, like lords of like the reach and shit.
Anything else, and they could only be brought into line by a genius political operator like Henry II and his Plantagenet.
Well, I mean, Game of Thrones doesn't take place in like the real world, so it's not really a direct time period. Very cinematic. Hold on, I'm running to the bathroom. Really. Why am I so bad at unpausing recently?
Descendants would struggle to hold on to various parts of this personal empire during their reigns for well over 200 years, with varying degrees of success, as the kings of France fought to take it all by force. And Richard's reign was no different. Did you know that Richard had part English ancestry? Not much, admittedly, but his grandmother's grandmother was Margaret of Wessex, and so he was descended from the Anglo-Saxon kings of England, including Alfred the Great, and on all the way back to Noah, and ultimately to the god Woden. Now, we might find that an amusing quirk of medieval genealogy, but divine ancestry is common in kings, and it's a way that kings are fundamentally different to other forms of leadership. It's important to remember that a king is not just a president or a prime minister in a shiny hat. And in terms of the overall...
What the fuck was up with that guy's eyebrows?
A president or a prime minister...
This is painted. They didn't have to do this. What? I guess that was just the way he looked. I don't know.
Minister in a shiny hat. And in terms of the overall conflict between the Plantagenets and the kings of France, we should remember that much of what is France today would not be territory of the Kingdom of France for a long time yet. The lords and commoners in Aquitaine, Anjou, Brittany and Normandy and so on did not consider themselves French, and there were many local dialects that marked them out as distinct. In England too, the lords, since the Norman conquest, had become something unique. They were lords over lands in England and Normandy. Not English, certainly not French. They were an Anglo-Norman ruling class with a dialect of their own. It was in this period, during the
What
Plantagenet
are they,
Rule,
the
that
United
these
States or
Anglo-Norman
something?
lords moved ever further away from Normandy and became far more English, especially when English lords lost their Norman estates and titles under John. It's during John's reign when we see a Norman lord appointed to an important position at court, being criticised for not being able to speak English. So what about Richard then? Is it true that he couldn't speak English? Well, we don't know for sure. We know he spoke a number of languages and understood Latin. His father understood English, though he did not have much cause to speak it. And we know
Wait, what did he speak then? French?
Richard grew up in
Did I
England,
miss that?
and although he would have been surrounded by people speaking the Anglo-Norman dialect of French, it's possible he
Oh.
did speak English. Either way, it doesn't matter. You know, there's a certain type of king observed in cultures all over the world, from the Americas to Africa and Europe to Polynesia. Anthropologists call this the stranger king, and Marshall Salins says that it's the most common form of kingship found in the
Interesting.
world. Because what
When I was like looking at like the history of just kind of like I guess more of like the lore of like he did this, he did this, he did this. Like he's like constantly doing rebellions, and that makes a lot of sense that would attribute to that if like you're the king of people that you can't fucking talk to.
you need in a king
Do I love H3? Absolutely. I'm a huge fan.
is someone truly different. And kings are, more often than not,
I'm very sad that they're off on break next month.
said to come from a different people, a different tribe, a foreign kingdom, or even a mythical race. In medieval Europe, though, there was an understanding that the nobles of Christendom were
Kind of a lazy looking map. Oh, so wait, so the Holy Roman Empire still existed? What? Bulgaria, Georgia. Actually kind of surprising how long some of these countries have at least somewhat existed in the same form. Obviously Hungary is significantly smaller. But Georgia is like the same, right? Oh, it doesn't go that far. Wait. Ah! My window's minimized. Speaking of having this Texas insurance thing up, and by speaking of, I mean I just saw it. I called the guy this morning and I was so fucking annoyed. Cause like the website like link like didn't even work. And I guess the one that texts me isn't actually the same guy. It wasn't actually Evan. I was very annoyed. He's like, yeah, I don't know why we didn't set it up. It's like, well, I've asked you like literally 3 times to do it. I just paid through January and I'm gonna look into a different service after the holidays. Write that down before I forget. State Farm's being a fucking piece of shit. Evan? Evan's the, like, your agent. It used to be Andrew, but it's the same number, but it's like a different guy. Weird. Pronounced Yvonne. Fuck you. No, it's not. I feel lost when they're on break, yeah. I just been like going back and watching old episodes. um Sometimes. I've been watching a lot of Red Letter Media. Anyway, sorry.
somewhat in medieval Europe, though, there was an understanding that the nobles of Christendom were somewhat interchangeable, and it hardly mattered to their subjects if their king or queen was Danish or Dutch or French or Italian.
I feel like it just makes more sense for my head to say like Lord. Because it seems like there is a, or maybe that's not, maybe I'm misunderstanding, there isn't like a main ruling one. So I guess everyone just had their own territory. I guess that's what it was like. That's weird to think about.
Queen Elizabeth famously said that she was the most English monarch England ever had. She was right, and she only got more right in the centuries after. And even she had Welsh ancestors. The extent to which the monarchs and their wives' foreignness mattered to people depended on their actions. And Richard's actions were, well, we'll talk about his actions in this video. But there's another interesting aspect of his ancestry. He was also descended from a female demon. The story goes that she was a lady of unearthly beauty who married an ancient Count of Anjou.
Thank God for the new Twitch rules, I can show this.
And bore him 4 children. Everything about this woman seemed perfect, except for the fact that she...
Is that feudalism? I thought feudalism was more of like a main... Wait, hold on. Hold on. Google's doing me dirty today. Alright. Feudal system was a combination of legal, economic, military, culture, and political customs that flourished in medieval Europe between the 9th and 15th centuries. So, yes, it is that, considering the time period. Broadly defined, it was a way of structuring society around relationship derived from the hoarding of land in exchange for services or labor. Although it is derived from the Latin word feudum, or whatever, which was used during the medieval period, the term feudalism and the system it describes were not conceived as a formal political system by the people who lived during the Middle Ages. The classic definition by Frank describes a set of reciprocal legal and military obligations of the warrior nobility and revolved around the key concept of lords, vassals, and fiefs. So, yes? A broader definition of feudalism, as described by Mark, includes not only the obligation of the warrior nobility by the obligations... A lot of obligation words, huh? Of all 3 estates of the realm, the nobility, the clergy, and the peasantry, all proletariats. All of whom were bound by a system of manorialism? This is sometimes referred to as feudal society, since the publication of Elizabeth A.R. Brown's The Tyranny of the Construct and Susan Beef and Vassals. There has been ongoing inconclusive discussion amongst medieval historians as to whether feudalism is a useful construct for understanding medieval society. I see. So it's not like what they would refer to as that. I guess. I don't know. Rules over land with peasants on it who farm on it thing. Yeah. Unearthly beauty is demonic? Yeah. Of course, duh.
She hated going...
That's why y'all in the chat are demons. Because you're all unearthly beautiful.
to church. When one day she was forced to do so, she grabbed 2 of her children and floated away through a window, never to be seen again.
That's what happens when I go to church.
Leaving behind 2 of her children, who were Richard's ancestors. The Counts of Anjou were quite open about this family legend, by the way. Richard was said to have declared that he was descended from the devil. Surprising, perhaps, for a society like medieval Christendom, and this would be a shameful heresy for a commoner. But you see, the rules are different for kings. Their difference from us is the point. So, as I said, Richard spent his childhood in England, his first 8 years certainly. There's no good evidence for this
This makes me want to go to the Ren Fair.
period of his life, but of course he would have had the typical nobleman's upbringing and education in manners and singing, dancing, poetry, languages and other study.
Racism.
In adulthood, Richard was known for composing his own songs and writing verse, and he enjoyed church music too. The boy Richard had other disciplines to master. There is no doubt that the medieval knight was one of the most effective warriors in world history.
I saw on the Wikipedia, I don't know if they're going to address it in this, but it's kind of a spoiler, that there's like, some people think that he was gay. But it's like not settled history, I guess. Or not
requiring
some people, but historians. I should be more specific about people, like not just like randos.
years of training in the martial arts and
'Cause I just assume
mastery of the
everyone's
war
gay.
horse, and Richard excelled at these things more than anything else. He also had a religious education, and contrary to what some might
I think
say,
most people think that he's bisexual.
he grew to be a conventionally religious man, and he was sure to regularly attend mass, and he was ever attended by bishops and priests, and he supported the church financially. But he was never supposed to be king
True rocks.
of England.
Gay.
His father Henry II intended his oldest son Henry for the crown, and his other sons, Richard, Geoffrey and John, were to be dukes over the other lands in this personal empire he had built. Henry the young king, as the oldest son came to be known, however didn't want to wait to be given what he thought was his. Men in their late teens are not famed for their patience and good sense.
Wait. Hold on, run that back. This is where I get so confused. So, Henry had multiple kids and he was like 19?
To be king of England. His father Henry II intended his oldest son Henry for the crown.
Oh! Henry III, okay. Motherfuckers gotta be more creative with their names.
And his other sons, Richard, Geoffrey and John, were to be dukes over the other lands in this...
What is a duke? Well, now I'm confused again. What the fuck's the difference between a king and a duke? Because they said that there was a bunch of... like, is it like within? Middle Ages duke. Duke is under a king. So why did they say that there were kings of other, like each territory had a king? That's what I'm confused about, I guess. So is there multiple kings in this kingdom? Or the duke's just like a lord? Many kings, and under the kings... Oh, they were like, so okay. So there was like a main king, and then like sub-kings, and then there's dukes under them. Okay, that makes sense. This is why I need you to do, chat, to help me with this.
personal empire he had built. Henry the young king, as the oldest son came to be known, however didn't want to wait to be given what he thought was his. Men in their late teens are not famed for their patience and good sense, and Henry the young king was worse than most.
Absolutely,
and in 1173 he rose in rebellion. All the 18-year-old Henry wanted was either England or Normandy or Anjou. That's not too much to ask, is it? Richard was
against his dad. The ultimate, fuck you, dad.
only 15. He was spirited away to safety at the French court, where he was knighted by the French king Louis VII. And he took part in an attack on his father's lands in Normandy along with his brothers, but they were defeated.
I feel like that was a lot of information really quickly. So then there was a French king that was a different area, right? Like he was like the, I guess, neighboring nation king. This is the most confusing map I've ever seen. Holy shit. So he left the country and went to France, and then France was like, yo, we back you. And then they went to support his brother?
He took part in an attack on his father's lands in Normandy along with his brothers, but they were defeated.
Okay, so he tried to back his brother's rebellion, the other Henry's rebellion, but it took a fat L.
When their father made generous offers for peace, they rejected them, and the war continued. After Eleanor, his mother...
What is this image? So gathered the army and fought his dad, gathered an army and fought his brother, gathered an army and fought the French, gathered an army and fought his brother. At some point, Maybe the family shouldn't have forgiven him.
Mother was captured by his father, Richard made an independent
Wait, what? His mother was? Why would? What?
generous offers for peace. They rejected them, and the war continued. After Eleanor, his mother, was captured by his father, Richard made
Wait, why was she not? I guess she was the one that had took him to France. Why was she in rebellion? Did they say that she supported the rebellion? Is that what's going on here? I guess? I don't know.
made an independent and bold decision to attack the town of La Rochelle. But eventually his
Not La Rochelle. Was there like 5 people here?
father outmaneuvered him and Richard had to flee. Eventually though, when he was
Ow.
the only one still resisting, Richard gave up and threw himself flat at his father's feet, weeping and begging forgiveness. The victorious and brilliant old king, only about 41 at this point by the way, rewarded his sons with far less than he had originally offered them. Still,
Dude, it's just like literally a family drama shit, but like on like a scale of like thousands of people dying for you.
Richard got half the revenues from Aquitaine and 2 castles there, so not too bad really, all things considered.
Yeah, but what do those castles look like? Aquitaine Castle. Alright, those are pretty fire. That one's mid. That one sucks. That one's mid as fuck. Eh. That one's nice. Like just like a building. Yo, castles are so cool. I love like the Game of Thrones ones that are like insanely like unrealistically gigantic. I just love that type of shit. About defense. It can be both.
But he could not just sit back and enjoy his newfound wealth. The rebellion that he'd been part of had stirred up countless lords who had to now be brought to heel, and it was Richard's task to do it in the name.
Wait, so now we're using the term lord? Is it, what is a lord then in this context? Is that under a duke? I'm a little annoyed that I don't. Like he's doing a good job of saying what level are they? I assume we're talking at a lower level than a duke, right? The lord's just like kind of like a guy. Well, the thing is, I just don't know if it's just gonna come up like in the right context. Maybe if I do it on Wikipedia, it'll be more contextualized. Oh, here we go. Under the feudal system, lord had a wide, loose, and varied meaning. An overlord was a person from whom a landholding or a manor was held by a mezzanine lord or vassal under various forms of feudal land tenure. The modern term landlord is a vestigial survivor of this function. The liege lord was a person to whom a vassal owed sworn allegiance. Neither of these terms were titular dignities, but rather factual appellations, which describe the relationship between 2 or more persons within the high stratified feudal social system. For example, a man might be a lord of the manor to his own tenants, but also a vassal to his overlord, who in turn was a vassal of the. So basically, a lord just was like a rich person, it seems. Where a knight was a lord of the manor, he was okay. So you could be like both. He was referred to in contemporary documents as John, surname Knight, Lord, manor name. A feudal baron was a title, a true. Oh god damn it! Now we gotta bring other titles into this shit. Was a true titular dignity with the right to attend parliament, but a feudal baron lord of the manor of many manors, was a vassal of the king. So it just seems like they're just rich people for the most part. With like lands and shit. Got it.
Of his father. So he took control of the loyal forces of Aquitaine and went from castle to castle, besieging them and taking them all. Richard was a young man now, knighted and experienced in war, with lands and income.
Experience at losing!
All of his own. So what did he look like? Well, he was extremely tall, he was handsome, like his parents. He had red blonde hair and bright blue eyes. This was a young man with long arms and long legs and in a state of superb physical fitness and ability. There were more rebellions over the next few years in Aquitaine as the King of France and the dukes and counts who were enemies of Henry and his sons were encouraged by the King of France. It was this conflict with France that would define Henry's reign and those of his sons.
Land under Angevin classical lordship, land under French rule, French royal immense. God damn it. I feel like I need a degree to like understand this shit.
And really all the Plantagenets that came after them. So the Kingdom of France at this time did not directly control much territory, but it imposed overlordship over the various territories that make up modern France. But thanks to Henry II, the King of France had lost control over Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, and had been outmaneuvered in other disputes like in Brittany. This relationship was complicated.
Where's Brittany? Is Brittany just like modern day like Britain?
Because technically, the kings of England still owed
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
fealty to the King of France for the lands they ruled there, and over the coming centuries it led to conflicts like the 100 Years' War. Anyway, as Duke of Aquitaine, Richard was almost constantly...
I just know this one story about the 100 Years' War where like everyone had like diarrhea on one of the sides. I don't remember which one it was. So they just fought it with their like pants off. Because they were like constantly shitting themselves. I don't know if that's real, but I remember hearing that story. There was like some battle in the 100 Years' War where like everyone got like food poisoning, so they just like fought it with like their trousers down. That sounds more like a story that probably would actually happen.
at war, putting down rebellions sponsored by the kings of France, trying to agitate against Henry and his sons. Richard, however, proved himself to...
Hold on. I'm gonna see if I can find it. England's children went to battle without pants. See, I'm not crazy! Fought between France and England throughout the time of facing the enemy that outnumbered them 2-1 on the most modest estimates. The English army was plagued by sickness, including dysentery, and had marched an average of 13 miles a day for over 2 straight weeks. The main disease running through the English camp was dysentery. Dysentery is a disease of the diarrhea. Dysentery is... Wait. Repeat that twice. Other symptoms were vomiting, fever, abdominal pain, and... Yeah, we've all had food poisoning. The English set up their positions on one side of the narrow field, which lay between 2 forested areas. The narrow approach allowed the limited number of men at arms to stretch across the front, while the archers took stationary positions on the flank, angled inward and with a row of protected wooden stakes. Thanks to this stationary position, the archers suffering from dysentery simply dropped their pants to more easily relieve themselves. As the French knights and men at arms approached the English, they traveled through the narrow, muddy field and up a slight hill, which pushed them together and slowed their advances. The professional English archers fired an incredible amount of armor-piercing bodkin arrows at the French. The almost 90-degree angle of the attack allowed the archers to catch vulnerable points in the armor, such as necks and knee joints, as well as the meeting of breast and back plates. In addition to the armor-piercing arrows, it is thought that the archers also dipped their arrows in their diarrhea as a form of biological warfare and also for psychological impact. Thanks to the archers bravely and resolutely manning their posts despite crippling and potentially fatal illness, the French were all but defeated by the time they reached the English front lines. As exhausted and depleted French met the Englishmen at arms in the deep mud, the lightly armored archers decided to attack on the flanks and made short work of the exhausted knights by stabbing at vulnerable spots with daggers and simply overwhelming lone knights. The conditions of the archers at the start of the battle were dire, but they simply dropped their pans and did what needed to be done. So I didn't make that up. I was telling you. You know, what's crazy is like a lot of the time, like the average foot soldier, again, is not wearing armor. So a lot of the time, like, you were pretty invulnerable if you, like, were a knight. Yelling and shooting on your arrows and yelling and shooting more. True. Do I think I would have been a good queen? No. I'm not... I'm too autistic. Because you have to be, like, I think I'd be, like, a good advisor. But definitely not, like, the face.
To be a truly brilliant military commander. In May 1179, when he was 21 years old, he led his army in a siege of Tailborg, which was considered basically impregnable. By this time, Richard was a veteran. What were you doing between the ages of 15 and 21? Playing video games?
Yes. And yes.
Getting drunk with your mates?
Well, to be fair, they were doing that thing, but it was just real games, and then you were also getting drunk with your mates.
Getting a useless degree in English literature? Well, Richard was making himself an expert in siege warfare, to such an extent that after moving his engines into position, it took him only 3 days to take the famed fortress at Tailborg. It was such a stunning victory.
Wait, was it just like a tower?
That the other counts and lords still holding out immediately surrendered their own castles, knowing they could never stand against this young prince, the Duke of Aquitaine. He wasn't just an expert strategist and tactician. At the moment when the assault on the fortress hung in the balance, when the hand-to-hand fighting at the gates could have gone either way, Richard threw himself into the...
What rank would somebody like Jon Snow be, because he was still a noble family, so just a regular... Well, it depends what... Do you mean like... He was crowned king in the north, so he would have been a king, right? Or do you just mean like... As a bastard son, he probably would have a minor lordship. If you're talking about like that. I think. I don't know what time period of the story we're referring to.
The thick of the fighting and won the day, won the town and king. All Aquitaine.
Well, see, the difference is they don't have like the same like reverie for like bloodlines, or like at least not in the same way, because it's not like winner gets all or like oldest son gets like everything. It's like you have a lot of I believe, I mean, spoiler, Richard had like a bastard son, and he had like a title of like duke. So like, because it's not just like one kingdom. It's a bunch of like little pockets, so he would still be like a landowner. They make it seem in Game of Thrones that you just don't get anything if you're like the fourth son or something. And that doesn't seem to be the case in the feudalism. So he'd probably like he just have like a certain plot of land that he was in charge of.
By his own hand. Henry the Young King, Richard's oldest brother, turned out to be a rather incompetent ruler of his own territories. Richard, however, managed to raise the power of the Duke of Aquitaine to a level never before attained. Henry the Young King would be worse than incompetent, however. In 1182, Henry the Young King, encouraged, or you might say manipulated, by the new, very young King of France, Philip II, who would become one of the great figures of medieval Europe, once again rebelled against his father. Worse, he sided with...
Dude, what has that relationship been like? Like, constantly rebelling. Like, why is he forgiving? Like... Was it like not a serious thing? Like when I think of Game of Thrones and like rebelling against somebody, like you die if you don't win. But it seems like they're like, oh, little JK. I guess I didn't mean it. And then they're just like, okay, that's fine. You can just, I was taking away some of your lands.
The rebel lord of Aquitaine against his brother Richard. Henry the young king was married to Margaret, Philip's sister, and so the brothers-in-law made war on the older king of England. Forces were raised, including mercenaries, in every territory from Brittany to the Pyrenees. Richard was already famous for his decisive actions in war, acting first before his enemies were expecting him, and now was no different. Already, by his mid-20s, he was proving himself to be the best soldier of his generation, and in this rebellion, Richard showed his quality. At once, he hunted down the Breton forces and executed all of those who fell into his hands. Then he rode almost non-stop for 2 days and nights, through late winter mind you, and fell upon a powerful mercenary force led by a rebel count as they attacked a church near Limoges. They had no idea he was coming. The count himself escaped, and Richard's horses were too exhausted to pursue. But they killed the mercenary leader and captured a great many of them. Richard then treated his prisoners with the respect they deserved. Some he drowned in the river Vienne, others he put to the sword, and the rest he merely blinded. But that's what you had to do with mercenaries who lived like pirates, raiding the common people and vulnerable churches. Everyone hated them, they were criminals really, so executing and maiming his prisoners was regarded as a moral act. But the war was still in the balance when Henry the young king got ill and died. Now,
I think that's how like most things happen. Back then. Got ill and died. I don't know what to tell you. Crazy to think about, like, basically any time you might have, like, had to go to the doctor for, like, antibiotics, like, you would have just died. Like, that would have just been, like, GG. GG no re. It's like playing a really fucking hard mode game.
Richard was the heir to the throne. It was not the end of the family's squabbles, however, because the king wanted to make young Prince John the Duke of Aquitaine, seeing as Richard would now get England. But Richard had been at war for 8 years to make the duchy his own, and he loved Aquitaine more than anything, and he was willing to risk everything.
Oh, so that's why they're saying he's not really English, because he's mostly been down here in, I guess, France? I mean, not France at the time, but modern France.
Rather than give it up. Richard's other brother Geoffrey was so displeased by being left out of everything that he went to the French court to continue the intrigue and to plan an invasion of Anjou. But God intervened, and Geoffrey was trampled to death by a horse.
That's the other way you die. You either get ill and die, or you get trampled by a horse. That's basically the main royalty deaths.
In a tournament. Without Geoffrey, King Philip mounted an invasion of Henry's lands, and Richard helped his father to drive them off. Both sides gathered their forces and faced off in battle array, prepared for a grand...
Wait, who's fighting who now? Philip's fighting Richard? He's fighting his brother? But he's on his father's side this time.
And pitched battle, the likes of which was hardly ever fought. The risks of grand battles like this were known to everyone. Unlike siege warfare, an open field battle was far too risky. A man could lose everything in a single day. His life, of course, or even worse, his fortune.
That is interesting. I guess, so it wasn't really like a, you know, I guess Game of Thronesian style battle. But I guess Game of Thrones never had like you just line up all of your guys and... I guess it's more Game of Thronesian.
Or even his kingdom. And the two sensible kings here were...
Like the Battle of the Bastards doesn't happen constantly.
Too cautious to risk it. Both sides backed away. Richard, unsurprisingly, would have attacked, and there's some evidence that he tried to force the issue. but a papal legate arrived from Pope Urban.
A what? A papal legate? What the fuck does that mean? Papal legate? Purple. Jesus Christ. Is a personal representative of the Pope to foreign nations. Okay, so he's like just like a church guy. The legate is appointed directly by the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, and okay.
Urban III, with instructions to stop all this pointless quarrelling and prepare for a crusade. Peace terms were worked out. 2 years of peace was agreed, and the armies
Okay. You kind of yada yadas a little bit of this.
dispersed. And this was when Richard abandoned his father and rode to Paris with King Philip. Philip so honoured him.
Wait, I thought they were beef, I guess. Oh, they meant between Philip and Richard. Dude, what's his dad doing?
The chronicler Roger of Howden, that every day they ate at the same table, shared the same dish, and at night
Were they fucking?
the bed did not separate them.
Oh.
Between the two of them, there grew up so great an affection that King Henry was much alarmed, and, afraid of what the future might hold in store, he decided to postpone his return to England until he knew what lay behind this sudden friendship. End quote. It's this episode and that quote that, from the mid-20th century, is sometimes used to portray Richard and Philip as homosexual or romantically involved.
We love that for them.
But that is a case of projecting modern prejudices and misunderstandings onto the past. For one thing, sharing a bed was the norm back then. Whole families
That's weird.
shared beds. Servants slept in beds with their mistress.
Oh, so that's where he got that thing from, because in Game of Thrones, like the books, Daenerys like shares her bed with like 2 of her servants. And I was like, this seems like really weird that it has to be from some sort of like historical claim. And seems to be the case that it is. You just sleep with your homies. It's so normal that a homophobe dick letter. Wait. Letter wrote a letter about it and tried to sort it out. Eh?
Mistress or master, and friends and companions shared beds too. There was nothing sexual about it.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, I've slept in the bed with my friends before. It's like, whatever. What, are you gonna sleep on the floor?
They had very different notions of privacy in that period. Because sharing a bed was something you only did with friends and family, it could also be a political act. Henry II and the greatest
I choose to believe they were fucking, okay?
knight who ever lived, William Marshall, symbolically shared a bed at one point as a
I don't necessarily believe that, but... It was so normal that a homophobic relative wrote a letter about it and tried to sort it out. Yeah, you have a little sleepover with your homies, it's fine. But for my fan fiction, I choose to believe
a
that.
gesture of friendship and peace. It was about a display of trust, and Richard and Philip were using one another, publicly showing signs of unity, to politically threaten.
We need to bring this back. We need to bring back sleeping with your homies.
King Henry. It worked too. Henry sent word to Richard, promising him everything he wanted, and Richard went to him to pay homage, swearing on the Gospels that he would be faithful to him against all men. So their army...
Right, queerness and history. Well, I mean, to be fair, this isn't really that distance from the time that you would just fuck dudes and it was like fine. Like we look at like the Greeks, it was like, yeah, it's fine, you could just fuck dudes. Who gives a shit if you're gay? Like whatever. You just did it, you know? It was kind of just like a normal thing that you just fuck dudes. Which that I want to return to that, where it was just like, yeah, you just fuck people, it's fine. NPD. Because that's sorry, I'm like trying to interpret this like image. Like what is going on here? So they were at a tower. Eye of Sauron. Knight. Person with bow. Waving. I love the the strange artistry. It's just diplomatic hand job.
Armies had almost clashed in a great and decisive battle on the 23rd of June 1187, but the cautious Henry and Philip had both decided that prudence was the best course.
Wait, I thought Henry died. Wait, hold on. Is Henry his dad? Because Philip's his homie, right? Because Henry II's his dad. So Philip's his homie that he's been sleeping with, and then, you know, for, you know.
And had withdrawn for peace talks. 2,000 miles away a few days later, on the 3rd of July, the King of Jerusalem took the opposite decision.
What? What were we talking about Jerusalem? Oh, right, because we were going to... I forgot what they were doing. Would seal their treaties by rubbing dongs together, thinking this is gay, is woke modern projection true.
Deciding against all good judgment to march to the relief of the city of Tiberias, he was surrounded and forced into battle at Hattin.
Where's Hattin? I don't know where we are anymore. Hattin. Is this a reference? Oh. So we're in... Good. Glad things have changed so much that we're not having battles in Israel. Oh my god. Plus it's on sale. Let's go!
On the 4th of July,
Play as samurai. It's the most fun in my opinion.
the army of Jerusalem was annihilated, and Jerusalem fell to the invaders. These events would ultimately lead to the Third Crusade. O mighty soldier, O man of war, at last you have a cause for which you can fight without endangering your soul. A cause for which to win is glorious, and for which to die is but gain. Are you a shrewd businessman, quick to see the profits of this world? If you are, I can offer you a bargain which you cannot afford to miss. Take the sign of the cross. At once you will have indulgence for all the sins which you confess with a contrite heart. The cross is cheap, and if you wear it with humility, you will find that you have obtained the kingdom of heaven. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. In the autumn of 1187, Richard...
Yo, why are you looking at me like that? Making me uncomfortable.
...took the cross at Tours. He was the first prince north of the...
You think everything was just like... beige like this? It wouldn't be, right? Like, it probably was like painted or it had banners. I feel like a lot of movies fuck up where they make it look like they're using like the ruins of something and they don't really try and make it look the way that it was at the time because they're maybe using like the real structure. Is that Destiny?
Alps to announce that he was going on crusade. He acted in
Fuck. Destiny's been around for a long time.
haste without seeking his father's permission. This sparked another crisis between the kings, and it was only averted when both Henry and Philip took the cross too. They were...
What is happening in this picture? Like, let's be real, every single person here is a homosexual.
swept up in it all, Sometimes history seems to have a weight and momentum, even to the people within it,
Ooh,
and even
shoes.
kings can be unable to swim against the tide. The crusading fever had been sparked off by Saladin's conquest of Jerusalem, and now the massed armies of Saracens.
See, this is kind of why I was like getting lost reading the lore, where I was like, what? How did we get here?
Were threatening all the Christian kingdoms of Outremer. All good Christian soldiers had to take up their sword in the armed pilgrimage to the Holy Land.
Oh, well, I want to look at that map. I bet. Jerusalem. Emirate of Damascus.
Take up their sword in the armed pilgrimage to the Holy Land and save it for Christendom. The church was driving the crusading mania, and preachers and troubadours.
Was the Crusades like a 5-head thing to get them to not fight in Greater Europe to question mark? What, I guess, was it a distraction?
Roused the masses in their enthusiasm. In later times, we might call this.
Oh yeah, didn't they like all die in a boat? Those dumbass idiots. I remember thinking this fucking idiots when I was a kid. Okay, the Children's Crusade was a failed popular crusade by European Christians to establish a second Latin kingdom of Jerusalem in the Holy Land. Took place, not that long after I think he died, in 1212. Although it was called the Children's Crusade, it never received papal approval from the Pope Innocent III to be an actual crusade. The traditional narrative is likely conflated with a mix of factual and mythical events, which include the preaching of visions of French boy and German boy. Oh, of visions by a French boy and a German boy. An intention of peaceful convert Muslims in the Holy Land, Christianity. This is why I fucking hate religion. Bands of children marching to Italy and children being sold into slavery in Tunis. The Crusades of the real events on which the story is based left areas of Germany led by Nicholas of Cologne and northern France led by Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, why did I think they all like died in like a boat crash? Maybe it's just one of the other crusades. You know, it's kind of fucked up. The school I went to growing up, their mascot was the Crusader. And then for some reason, the high school that I went to, the mascot was the Vikings. Very odd choice for a Christian school. At least on the second one. First one is like, oof. And then the second one is like, what? Odd choice to pick a Viking. Kid Nation. Oh, wait for. Maybe we can watch a video on that. I'm down to do just history stuff today, so.
Propaganda, and once the public were having the crusading mania, and preachers and troubadours roused the masses in their enthusiasm. In later times, we might call this propaganda, and once the public will is formed, it can take on a life of its own. Those men who did not take the cross were given gifts of a spindle and wool, to suggest that they were therefore nothing but women, suited only for staying home and spinning. There were financial pressures applied too. Everyone had to pay a tax to fund it. Everyone, apart from
what are you gonna do, sleep with your homies?
Those who took the cross. Now, you might have had a perfectly valid reason for not taking the cross. In fact, going on crusade might have been the worst possible thing for you to do, making no sense for you whatsoever. But, whipped up by those in whose interests it was that you do it, Public opinion was
Razor's
now
not in the
against
room.
you, and the weight of it proved irresistible. Henry was undoubtedly reluctant. He'd been promising to go on crusade ever since 1172, but he'd done
Kind of like joining the IDF.
nothing about it. As far as he was concerned, he had more
seems.
important things to attend to. Richard, however, was genuinely committed to the cause. Some men are born soldiers. Richard was 30 years old now, and he'd been fighting half his
Women be spinning.
life. But that was against Christians. He had done his duties as a prince, and he had committed countless acts of heroism. But a crusade was something else entirely, something far greater. But no matter how keen they actually were, they couldn't go at once. First they had to raise enormous sums of money, and it required a remarkable level of planning and
Crusade
years
on
of preparation. And despite everything else, the local wars continued. Rebellious counts attacked Richard's lands, and Richard attacked theirs in turn. In
How are you doing both of these things? Didn't it take like 9 billion years to travel from like 15 feet back in the day?
1188, Richard assaulted Toulouse and captured 17 castles. Philip, his supposed close friend and brother in the coming crusade, took up arms and invaded his lands. In one battle over a town he was fighting to win back,
Oh, sorry.
Richard was thrown from his horse in the fighting, and he was rescued by a local butcher. However, by 1189,
What? I thought he was doing a crusade. Why is he now fighting back at home? I feel like we're skipping some crucial information here. I gotta run that back.
genuinely committed to the cause.
Okay, he wants to do...
Some men
okay.
are born soldiers. Richard
Sure.
was 30 years old now, and he'd
Oh, he's like an old bitch at that point.
been fighting
Right.
half his life. But that was against Christians. He had done his duties as a prince, and he had committed countless acts of heroism. But a crusade was
Hey, my shit gets mixed up, okay?
something else entirely, something far greater. But no matter how keen they actually were, they couldn't go at once.
Oh, they
First
couldn't
they
go.
had to raise enormous sums of money,
Gotcha. Okay, so then they pressured everyone, but then whilst that was happening and they were getting all this money, this rebellion happened.
despite everything else, the local wars continued. Rebellious counts
I
attacked
see.
Richard's lands, and Richard attacked theirs in turn. In 1188, Richard assaulted Toulouse and captured 17 castles. Philip, his supposed close friend and brother in the
No,
coming crusade,
Philip!
took up arms and invaded his lands.
His lands being Richard? Or... Wait. The visuals are making this more confusing.
In one battle over a town he was fighting to win back, Richard was thrown from his horse in the fighting, and he was rescued by a local butcher.
Oh, does he get to share his bed now? Ooh, new love interest.
However, by 1189, Richard once again fell out with his father over his inheritance and sided with Philip. Together, they attacked Henry's forces and drove him into flight.
Wait, what? Wait, Philip invaded his... What? Why are we yada-yadaing that? So Philip attacked his lands, and like, why are people like so easy to forgive in this world? Like, I feel like we're leaving some shit out here, or if this was like real, I feel like this is something that I would like. If this was like fiction, I would be like, that doesn't make any sense. Why aren't they mad at or why are they just forgiving each other? It doesn't seem realistic. But again, we're learning this from historical texts, so you know.
It was here where a famous incident occurred. Henry's rearguard was under the command of William Marshall. Richard's forces, galloping behind, were about to overwhelm them when William
Did he use this image because rearguard? This illustration is a different incident. Thank you for showing me it. I want back that guy with the drawings. Just ChatGPT or AI art it. Okay.
turned his horse and rode straight at Richard. Neither man wore their mail hauberks, and as William levelled his lance, Richard cried out, "By God's legs, do not kill me, Marshal. That would be wrong. I am unarmed." This is the way William told it anyway, so take it with a pinch of salt. And the Marshal cried out in answer, No, let the devil kill you, for I won't.
Wait, you said they both raised their lances. How are they unarmed then? Hold on, what?
Leveled
Didn't he
road
say?
straight galloping behind, were about to overwhelm them.
So who the fuck is William? Why is William all of a sudden involved in this?
William Marshall,
Who is William Marshall?
Richard's forces galloping behind,
I guess he's not gonna tell us.
were about to overwhelm them when William turned his horse and rode straight at
Okay, so
Richard.
they're chasing them, and then one of them turns around. William turns around, and then goes straight for Richard.
Neither man wore their mail hauberks, and as William levelled his lance, Richard cried out, "By God's legs, do not kill me, Marshal. That would be wrong. I am unarmed." This is the way William told it anyway, so take it with a pinch of salt. And the Marshal cried out in answer, "No, let the devil kill you, for I won't." And
Who's Marshall? What?
adjusting his aim, he ran his lance through Richard's horse. He then rode to safety with his rear guard. The king saved. So did this actually happen? Well, apart from the dialogue, perhaps.
So he killed his horse? What? Oh, William is his rearman. Oh, okay. So William... Or sorry, Richard, wait. Oh, I'm so good.
Probably did happen. And that oath, "By God's legs," apparently that was actually one of Richard's favourites. I might start using that myself. King Henry, on the run now from this alliance of betrayal, fell increasingly ill until on 6th of July 1189 he died.
What? Who? Richard?
King Henry, on the run now from
Henry.
this alliance of betrayal, fell increasingly ill until on 6th of July 1189 he died. Richard strode into the Abbey church where his father's body had been taken.
Why are you just allowed to be there? Like, I feel like if I'm at war with somebody, like I don't know, let's say California is at war with Washington, D.C. or something, like, I'm not going to expect that I can go to Washington, D.C. and vice versa. This is what is so confusing to me. Like, they're just like, yeah, it's cool that you're here.
And stood at the head of the bier, saying nothing and showing no outward sign of emotion. Then he turned away. Richard was 31 years old. He'd been at war since he was 15. Now he was king.
Same.
And he had a lot of work to do. William Marshall was standing vigil by the king's body. "So, Marshal," Richard said, "the other day you tried to kill me, and would have done so had I not turned your lance aside." "If I had wanted to kill you," William replied, "nothing could have stopped me." "Marshal," Richard said, "you are pardoned. I bear you no malice."
We need to learn from these people. We need to forgive. What the fuck?
Indeed, Richard praised and rewarded the Marshal and all the king's loyal men who had stayed with the king in his defeat and death. Those men were loyal to the end. They were loyal beyond the end. These were the kinds of men that Richard wanted by his side. Men who would not desert him even after all was lost.
See, that's probably like a Game of Thronesian thing, because that was like a big thing that Robert, that they wrote about Rob in the lore, wrote about King Robert, was that he pardoned loyal men, because he wanted, because, you know, they had a code. They obviously were willing to, you know, live and die for their faction, I guess. And he wanted people like that. So I think that's probably an inspiration that, George R. R. Martin got from the story. I mean, maybe this is a common thing, but I choose to believe that they got it from this.
To secure the loyalty of William Marshall, Richard granted him the hand of Isabel de Clare, heiress to vast estates in the Welsh Marches, as well as the county of Pembroke and the lordship of Leinster in Ireland. At a stroke, the famous knight had become one of the most powerful men in England, in all Christendom, in fact.
Was not a hobo? What? Movies always make medieval people so scuffed.
The
Ruffy?
famous knight had become one of the most powerful men
William Marshall was not a hobo.
in
Okay.
England, in all Christendom, in fact. It would be like winning the lottery, controlling a multi-billion-dollar company, and becoming a powerful politician all in one day, and getting a top-quality wife.
Nice!
William the Marshal would serve Richard loyally for the rest of his life. The Marshal set off immediately to marry the de Clare heiress. As he was boarding his ship at Dieppe, the victor of 1,000 tournaments rushed up the gangplank with such eagerness that he fell off it and plunged headfirst into the filthy dock water. Richard was king, but he was still going to go on crusade. Before he
Wait, did he die? Or that's just like a fun anecdote that he fell into the water. What?
could do that, he had to secure his lands. The duchies and counties had to be brought to heel.
I just assume if you do any mistake at all, ever, you just die.
Lest they think that this was an opportunity to wriggle out of their duties, or even take up arms. Richard was busy arranging marriages and securing royalty. England, however, was secure. His succession to the crown was assured. Even so, he intended to be seen as a fresh start and a welcome alternative to his father, who had ended up quite unpopular, partly due to the crusade tax that he'd raised. Richard restored
I assume that he said tax, not a tax. This is auto-generated.
confiscated lands to English lords, and the prisons were emptied. So when Richard landed at Portsmouth, he was greeted with cheers of joy by the English. Richard was already loved for his martial brilliance. Everyone loves a winner, don't they? Especially in their king. He was not above theatrical propaganda either. He arrived
Oh shit, he was a furry.
in England with one of his father's most unpopular ministers, ostentatiously loaded down with chains. The implication being that
Who was the guy? I can look up. Who's the guy? William something? William Riker. I've been watching Star Trek, sorry. You guys said in the chat, and I'm too lazy to go back in that thing. William Marshall. Well, they said he served for the rest of his life. I assume he didn't actually fucking die. I think that's this one. Yeah, Pembroke. How did he die? Favor. Oh, this motherfucker lived for a while, so yeah, he definitely didn't die with that. I think it's just like a goofy story. Okay. Weird thing to add, I guess.
Richard was here to administer justice. He's often accused of not caring about governing England, but his next actions prove that not to be the
Destiny.
case. He appointed many trustworthy and experienced men to the important positions of the realm, and many of them had served his father. He did the same in all of his lands, appointing those who could be trusted, and his decisions everywhere proved largely correct. He's also accused of robbing England blind to pay for his crusade. It is said that he declared that he would sell London if only he could find a buyer. Clearly, he saw his English subjects as nothing more than cash cows. Only, it's not true. He didn't raise a tax to pay for the crusade. His father did a few years before, but Richard didn't. Instead, he sold whatever he had to willing buyers. And it worked in this way for all the kings of England. When a lucrative position like county sheriff became available, the great lords of the realm would pay the king for the honour. The sheriff...
Nice! Really good system. I can see no flaws in that method. Glad we've moved on from that. That definitely doesn't happen now. One sec. Dogs. I gotta sort out my Amazon like scheduled order shit, because I just keep getting like dog food at like the randomest time. Like I don't have the like monthly service. Right. I don't know how.
Was like all the kings of England. When a lucrative position like county sheriff became available, the great lords of the realm would pay the king for the honour. The sheriff was like the crown's representative in a county, the shire reeve, responsible for law and order and for carrying out the king's will. And if you could get one of these jobs, you'd be set for life.
So I guess you would have like a higher position if like you were in like another person's territory or like another state, so to say. You would this is like a federal job, it seems, right? Like you would have higher authority even than like the lord in certain matters, or the Dutch or duke or whatever.
You could rake in huge sums, depending on the county. Some were worth more than others. And everyone with any ambition knew that these jobs were worth the investment. You still had to do a good job, of course, because you served at the king's pleasure, and he could kick you out and offer it to someone else who could pay instead. The turnover of sheriffs and other officials was a normal part of a king's business. Men would die or fall ill, or they would be
What? Crazy.
promoted or shuffled around, and every time they got a new job, someone would pay the king. The only difference with Richard was that all of these jobs changed hands at once, so a decade's worth of shuffling happened in a year or two, so he raised a lot of money from his lords very quickly. But nobody was complaining. Everyone got what they wanted, and Richard did not put anyone in place he wasn't absolutely confident in. If he had been truly reckless, he would have
the fucking shitty comedy by Adam Sandler?
sold the positions to the highest bidder, no matter the consequences for his kingdom. But he didn't do that. So he ended up with enough money to pay for a fleet.
Have you guys seen The Favor? Oh, is it Seth MacFarlane? Whatever. But no, I haven't seen it. I've seen a review of it.
However, the journey there would be almost as exciting and action-packed as the crusade itself.
Sorry.
From the start, the tension with Philip
I'll make sure you're paying attention.
was palpable. The King of France was the more important man. After all, Richard held his continental possessions with Philip as his overlord, and England was a smaller kingdom in terms of tradition, prestige,
What? No, it wasn't. Not according to that picture.
and wealth. But
I guess
Richard certainly had far more personal charisma than Philip.
he's got more riz.
The traits that helped to make Philip so enormously successful over his long reign, his prudence, patience, and pronounced sense of his own greatness, were not suited to this great undertaking. Richard, however, was a man of action to the core. When presented with a problem, he acted swiftly, decisively, and competently. Like that time he conquered a town in about an hour. When the expedition reached Messina in Sicily, the pressures of...
What do you mean expedition? Which one? You just said expedition. You didn't... Which expedition? Those guys all over the place.
of having the English and French armies and fleets in the town boiled over. Rising food prices and scarcity made men on all sides desperate. Richard took over a monastery and used it as a supply dump, and rumours went about that Richard intended to conquer the city, maybe the whole island. Some sort of fighting broke out, and the local authorities couldn't stop it. So Richard invited King Philip and the Sicilian governors of Messina.
Monkey's become immune to her bark. What the fuck? There's a dog barking outside.
To
Puppies! Maggie! Dude, my dog's insane.
a conference at his lodgings so that they could join. Broke out, and the local authorities couldn't stop it. So Richard invited King Philip and the Sicilian governors of Messina to a conference at his lodgings so that they could jointly come up with a solution to the growing disorder, like imposing price limits on certain goods and appropriate discipline and punishments for wrongdoers on all sides. But while they were in the middle of discussion...
Did they say what expedition it was? They just kind of like threw out that they were going on an expedition, but I feel like they didn't. Maybe I wasn't paying attention.
Enough money to pay for a fleet of ships, and he set off for the Holy Land.
Oh, he was doing another crusade. Okay, so he was coming with his boy, and then they, I guess, ended up on an island?
Richard took over a monastery and used it as a supply dump, and rumours went about that Richard intended to conquer the city, maybe the whole island.
Went about.
Some sort of fighting broke out, and the local authorities couldn't stop it.
Some sort of fighting? Thank you for being specific about that.
Richard invited King Philip and the Sicilian governors of Messina to a conference at his lodgings so that they could jointly come up with a solution to the growing disorder, like imposing price limits on certain goods and appropriate discipline and punishments for wrongdoers on all sides. But while they were in the middle of discussions, the sounds of shouts and the clash of arms reached them from outside. A riot had started in that quarter. In fact, the lodgings of Hugh de Lusignan, a baron of Aquitaine and an ally of Richard, was being attacked. As far as Richard was concerned, the time for talking was over. The locals could not impose order, and so he would. King Philip primly said that he would do nothing to help, so taking up his sword, Richard marched out of the conference and called his men to him. They broke down the gates of Messina and charged into the riot with Richard at the head of his forces. Anyone who resisted was killed, but it was not some simple massacre. Richard lost 25 of his own household troops, a significant percentage. Nevertheless, it was all over in an hour or two. While the English soldiers plundered the city they'd conquered, the banners of their king were...
It says Tormina down the road. Wait, why didn't... What, you're telling me there's no image, like... Oh, what? Okay, so it's the top of the boot. Wait, it's the island. 1908 Messina earthquake. Pretty. Seems like a vacation to, oh, yeah. The fucking cruise ships. Alright, imagine this. This is very Game of Thronesy. I guess Mediterranean style. The fuck is this bitch? Let's see if we can see something related to this. Nice! Just imagine this when we're thinking about this story.
Raised over the walls and towers of Messina. Philip tartly demanded that they be taken down and his own raised up in their place. This wasn't just about his sense of personal honour. As equal partner in this crusade, he expected an equal share of all.
Dude, they are homies. It's kind of like an interesting story between the boys. I want to see a dramatized version of this. We're like, cause like, we've been watching the X-Men movies, and like, we've gotten to like the newer ones. We watched First Class last night. Pretty good movie. It's really weird at the end. Doesn't really make sense why they decided to shoot. At whatever, doesn't matter. Point being, the relationship between like Charles and um Eric, I always thought like Magneto and Xavier, I always thought was like super fun to watch. I'd never seen the First Class, by the way. So it was a new watch for me. And I feel like I could see like a series where there's kind of like a story like that between the frenemies here, I guess. You accidentally did that. But I could see the homies having that type of relationship. I'm like thinking about it in my head. Now we missed it. Well, the thing is, I'm watching it with Razor. It's like our thing. Also, I don't really know how to do that.
All the loot. In the spirit of compromise, Richard lowered his own and raised up the banners of the
They have not said it? Oh, shit.
Templars and the Hospitallers, and he handed control of the city over to them. Nevertheless, it was Richard who maintained order by taking hostages from the wealthier families of Messina, and it was Richard who built a wooden fortress on a hill overlooking the city. The price of bread and wine was fixed, and anyone who gambled was stripped naked and whipped
Why?
through the army 3 days in a row, while sailors were dunked in the sea 3 days in a row.
What? But why? The guy's just kind of saying stuff, and he's not really elaborating as to why. Why?
And so, thanks only to Richard's decisive actions, the crusade overwintered in Sicily in relative peace. Surely you can see why men loved to follow Richard. This is the kind of king that all men, all warriors at least, wish to serve. A king who leads them well in war and in the times between wars.
Yeah, but what did the sailors do wrong? You just said sailors. Like, does he just hate sailors? Because if, like, you need the sailors to go to where you're going, like, what?
A king who values them highly because he is a warrior himself. A king who will not send them anywhere that he is not willing to go himself.
Okay.
A king who you can fight beside, shoulder to shoulder. Look at the adoration heaped on elite sports stars today. Imagine if one of those sporting champions, an especially tall and handsome one,
Oh, if just sailors were caught gambling. Okay, that makes more sense.
was also a war hero, descended from a line of heroes.
Do I know who this is? No.
And was the leader of your country. Is it really so hard to...
Yeah, but he also likes to kiss his son, so it's really weird. Open mouth kiss. Didn't know that about him.
to understand why Richard is remembered so fondly even today? Anyway, it was now when Richard married the only Queen of England.
Wait, okay, so I feel like he had to establish if that was uncommon. It seems like Henry was also fighting on the front lines, right? But they kept rebelling against him. Like, was it uncommon for, like, kings to fight on the front lines? I kind of felt like it was common, which I thought was kind of stupid in a way. So then, what the fuck? Why is there assessment that that was... Oh, very uncommon. Okay. I wouldn't know. What the fuck, Acorn? I told you that you were supposed to be there.
England, who was never to set foot in the country, while she was queen at least. Richard had been betrothed to Philip's sister Alice for more than 20 years, ever since she was a child, and for all that time she had been in the custody of Henry II. However, when she grew to adulthood, old King Henry had made her his mistress. It was rumoured that she had given birth to an illegitimate child. Richard refused.
Wait, the second... That would have been his dad? So Alice would have been his dad's mistress? Or his brothers. He said old king, so I'm assuming that was the dad.
To marry such a woman, even if she was the sister of the King of France. It was a doubly humiliating affront to Philip. He sailed away from Messina, leaving Richard behind. They say that the end of the formal betrothal was where their rift, their rivalry, deepened beyond repair. After Philip was gone, the 70-year-old Eleanor of Aquitaine arrived, with Richard's bride-to-be, Berengaria of Navarre. She's quite an inconsequential figure, and she was probably pretty, well-mannered, and
Probably? Okay.
totally boring. Richard
Totally boring? Okay.
married her to secure
That's how people describe me.
his southern borders and ensure Aquitaine had a local ally. But despite the apparent expectations of the soldiers on the crusade, it was not a love match. Even after his marriage, Richard preferred to share his bed with other women, although he did his duty and slept with her often enough. Their marriage, however, was to be childless, and after he died, the crown would pass to his brother John. So Richard was not a faithful man. There is a story that he was so randy that even in the week that he was dying from sepsis, he had women, multiple women, brought to share his bed, his deathbed. Richard did acknowledge at least one illegitimate son, known as Philip of Cognac, after he married the heiress of that land, and he lived until he was at least in his early 20s.
Wait, whoa. Getting ahead of yourself here. So he married somebody else at some point? And then why was it illegitimate? Needlework and medicinal opium? I mean, fair enough. Illegitimate, like, after he married...
After he married the heiress...
This guy said he was an author. I feel like I'm more confused in the way that this is structured.
...of that land. And he lived until he was at least in his early 20s.
After he married the heiress of that land. Wait, did the son marry? Richard did acknowledge... Oh, I think he's acknowledging Philip, because Philip married the heiress of the land. Got it. Okay. That was confusing.
Cognac, after he married the heiress...
He being Philip.
...of that land. And he lived until he was at least in his early 20s, when he either died or became known by some other title. There is a story... that he killed the Viscount of Limoges in revenge for his father's death. But we don't know if that happened or how it might
Who was the... What?
have occurred. That's pretty cool though. I hope that did happen. That would make a good novel.
Thank you for explaining that.
Richard couldn't marry Berengaria right
Yeah, definitely keeping it on the rails here.
away because it was Lent. So they sailed off towards the Holy Land, but an almighty storm blew up and scattered the fleet, along with about 25 other ships.
You know what's fun about this? It's like, you don't have to do any of this. Like, these crusades were, like, completely pointless. For the most part. You just like, oh, like, the church's gonna get mad at you. It's like, okay, but, like... Fuck 'em?
Berengaria's ship, and Richard's sister Joan was with her too, had been blown to Cyprus and was now sitting off the coast at Limassol. Cyprus was in a strange situation at this time. It had been part of the Byzantine Empire, but a member of the royal family, Isaac Ducas Comnenus, had basically seized it for himself and set himself up as an independent ruler, calling himself emperor. He was a tyrant, really. He'd even allied with Saladin. All those from Richard's scattered ships who washed up on shore
I can't
were
imagine this wasn't profitable
thrown in
for
prison
some people, I
and
guess.
treated terribly. Isaac tried to get Berengaria and Joan off their ship, even trying by force, but sensible women that they were, they declined his false invitations and fought off the attacks. All the while, Isaac was assembling his forces on shore to take the English ships and the princesses into his custody. These would be enormously valuable bargaining chips. He could charge a king's ransom if he got them.
Oh, this is the one I read earlier. Spoiler, he gets fucking blown the fuck out.
2 fortunes at least, probably enormous political advantages too. Now, knowing what we know about Richard, what do you think he did when he arrived at Limassol and found his wife-to-be and his beloved sister in danger? Well, when Isaac refused to release his prisoners or give back the property he had seized, Richard attacked the assembled army defending the barricades on the shore. He and his
It seems like a bad move, my guy.
men piled into rowing boats and pulled hard for the shore, his archers shooting when in range. As the boats ground against the beach, Richard leapt out, sword in hand, and charged the barricades. There was a short fight, and the Cypriots ran away. Richard took control of Limassol and found great stores of wine, meat, and grain. The furious would-be emperor, the tyrant Isaac Comnenus, made camp with his army about 5 miles outside the city, and he declared that he would give battle to this upstart pirate the next day. We know Richard by now. We know what to expect, but Isaac Comnenus didn't.
Dumbass. Fucking Isaac.
In the dark of the night,
I feel like we're never gonna address the anecdote.
Richard had his horses quietly disembarked from his ships and exercised to shake off their sea legs. When Isaac woke, bright and early the next day, hungry for his scrambled eggs and orange juice, he found his camp surrounded by Richard's mounted knights. The Cypriots immediately ran away again, and Isaac himself got clear, but he didn't even have time to get dressed first, and he left behind his horses, his arms, his treasure, and his imperial standard, embroidered with cloth of gold. Richard declared that he would send the standard to the Abbey of Bury St Edmunds, which is near where I live. It's a lovely town today.
Doxed.
So here in Limassol was where the King of England would marry his queen, and here was where she was crowned by a Norman bishop. After that, Richard conquered Cyprus. It only took him about 6 weeks. At that point, Isaac
The most low-res image possible.
agreed to give himself up with only one condition, that he would not be clapped in irons. After he had lost everything, all he wanted was to be spared that final indignity. Richard happily agreed and promptly had him clapped
In silver. Spoiler, because this is the one part I read.
in custom-made silver chains instead. Cyprus was an incredibly important place for the Crusaders, and Richard had made conquering it look easy.
I feel like that didn't happen. I feel like this is like when we look at like all this historical storytelling, I feel like a lot of this shit's gonna be embellished, and you always have to like think of like, I don't really feel like that happened, but you never know, I guess. Should have clapped them cheeks, am I right?
Easy, trivial even. But now he would face a far tougher test. Now he sailed on for Outremer and his showdown with Saladin. Saladin is one of the great figures of
The next boss.
high medieval history.
Yeah,
like
true.
Richard, he's another
Written by the
king
way.
whose legend is more powerful than the history. People might not know much about
What does that mean? The legend is more powerful than the history?
his deeds, but they know Saladin was a man of honour and brilliance. Well, he was an expert politician, a genius even, and he was a pretty good general too, much like Henry II, really. Back in August 1189, a few years after Jerusalem fell and the great Crusader city
Yeah, they said earlier that that Richard was a big fan of like troubadours and stuff, which are like artists and like music players and songwriters. So I wonder why he would be, because that they always like to glaze up their monarchs. So we always take this with a grain of salt, right?
of Acre was also conquered. The former king of Jerusalem, Guy de Lusignan, eventually took his meagre forces and laid siege to Acre, trying to take it back. But he didn't have the men necessary, and he was in turn
Wait, so the French also... That's what Israel should be owned by. The French need their land back.
besieged by Saladin.
God.
But Saladin couldn't overcome Guy's camp either, and so the double siege continued for 2 years.
What? What is a double siege? Hold on, wait, what?
Forces and laid siege to Acre, trying to take it back. But
Oh, they were just sieging two different places. Got it.
he didn't have the men necessary, and he was in turn
Sorry, these pictures are making it more confusing.
besieged by Saladin. But Saladin couldn't overcome Guy's camp either, and so the double siege continued for 2 years.
I hate when you get a double
But with
siege.
each month that passed, more and more reinforcements poured into Guy's camp. King Philip arrived months before Richard because he'd set off earlier and he hadn't conquered any empires on the way. But he had since only set up a few catapults to fling rocks at the walls while he sat down at Tyre, politicking with the local lords to try to resolve who was to be the future king of Jerusalem and other issues. And when Richard got to Tyre,
That was a little opinionated. Maybe he was trying to make... That actually seems like he's doing diplomacy. You like... Get the local lords on board with your campaign.
Philip had seen to it that they wouldn't let Richard into the city. But Richard wasn't bothered. The very next
No, the frenemies again! Now he's not letting Richard into the city?
day, he took his fleet to Acre.
Dude, there's like such an interesting story that could be told about the relationship where maybe like he was doing politics where Richard's like really aggressive and they're like, okay, so I know how he's gonna act here. So I don't want him to be in the city because we're about to find a diplomatic solution to this and he's gonna fuck it up. There's a story there. There's a fan fiction story there, okay? I want to see it.
He found a huge ship flying the French flag. Smelling a rat, Richard chased it down. It
Smelling of rat? What the fuck does rat smell like?
turned out to be a blockade runner trying to sneak supplies into Accra. The enemy
Oh, smelling a rat, like... Not like a literal one.
ship was promptly sunk in sight of all the armies around the city, and Richard was given a hero's welcome. The scene around Accra was one of complete destruction. It was a land laid waste by 2 years of warfare. There were tumbled walls and scorched earth, and the filth and detritus of thousands of people. The pestilential air reeked of human waste and campfires. This was Richard's kind of place. From the belly of his ships, the King of England craned vast amounts of pre-built siege equipment that his men had built over winter in Sicily. He also had erected an enormous wooden fortress outside Accra. The siege stepped up a gear. Walls were battered down and undermined. The Crusaders attacked the breaches, while Saladin's forces outside attacked the Crusaders. Both Richard and Philip fell ill with some sort of disgusting malady that made their hair and nails fall out. It seemed for a while like Richard was going to die, but soon he demanded to be carried in a litter to the front lines so he could continue to direct the fighting. The defenders inside the city had inherited the technology of Byzantine Greek fire and launched incendiary bombs and shot flamethrowers at the attackers over
What?
and over. Eventually though, the city fell and the English and French banners were raised over the city. Now, in this moment of victory, a decision was made that would have far-reaching consequences for Richard, England and all Europe. Because a man called Duke Leopold of Austria, a man with impressive connections
Oh shit, new challenger approaching.
but little money and almost no soldiers,
And apparently Santa Claus.
also raised his own banner beside those of the kings. Now he'd been there in Outremer longer than they had, but basically all the German part of the crusade had either never arrived or had now left or died of disease. Raising his banner as if he was equal to the kings of England and France was worse than a joke.
He did a slight.
It was offensive. Also, by raising his banner, he
Also, when did Germany get involved in this?
was claiming a share of the loot. So, Leopold's banners were torn down, and it was this act that led ultimately to the petty, jealous Leopold taking Richard captive on his way home. We'll get to that in a bit. After Acre fell, Philip, outdone at every turn by Richard's energy and ability, sailed for home. Not trusting Philip to keep his word to leave Richard's lands in peace, Richard also sent a group of Englishmen back to warn everyone that despite their oaths to the
I smell fire. I assume that is my neighbor.
the contrary, Philip was probably going to start trouble again.
Not like their house. They like smoke things.
But Richard stayed in order to secure his greatness. And it's now that we get observations of Richard from the Muslim chroniclers. For a man called Baha ad-Din, a companion of Saladin, Richard was, quote, a man of great courage and spirit. He had fought great battles and showed a burning passion for war. His kingdom and rank were inferior to those of the French king, but his wealth, reputation and valour were greater. End quote. Elsewhere, Baha ad-Din refers to Richard's wisdom, experience, courage and energy, and to the cunning of this accursed man. To gain his ends, he sometimes uses soft words, at other times, violent deeds. God alone was able to save us from his malice. Never have we had to face a subtler or a bold.
I definitely believe Baha ad-Din is a real person, and it definitely was not Richard writing this.
Older opponent. End quote. These kinds of comparisons between the two kings have been made ever since, because Philip made the clever choice to leave.
I like to think about like online discourse, like drama on Twitter, like what that would be seen as and what would stay in the history books if it was like a conflict, like, or in the context of like a conflict, because the things that last are probably not ever, you know, the total picture. There's also an interesting aspect of Twitter drama, like narrativizing. Like we even see it like in modern times. And the one that's more popular does tend to be the most believed. That doesn't mean it's wrong. But it does. I don't know, make you think. Don't really have a greater claim than that. I haven't really well thought out that idea.
Didn't he? It was of more material benefit to him to be at home scheming in France. While Richard was busy, Philip would take advantage.
House caught on
but
fire while he
promising
was
to
on
do
a
something
panel,
like a
came
crusade
back in
and then
his
slinking
outro and he
away
went
when it's
offline.
barely begun
I don't even know who that is.
is not the act of a hero,
Autism is a streamer?
is it? Even his friends and contemporaries and his first biographers understood that this act left an indelible stain on his reputation. Philip was undoubtedly the greatest politician of his generation, and he made his kingdom strong and powerful during his reign. But the material successes of politicians don't stir men's hearts, and Philip would never become a legendary and beloved figure like Richard. Anyway, so back at Accra, Richard,
I don't know, I'm a fan. Philip seems like he's fine.
gathered his forces for the next conquest.
One of their
But
enemies,
first,
a
they had
bunch
to
to retrospectively give it. Oh, that's fair.
get rid of these prisoners. He tried to hand
That
them
makes
over to Conrad, the ruler of Tyre, so that
Tiberius
he could
and
ransom
Lisa.
them to Saladin. But Conrad would do nothing that would help Richard, who was allied with Conrad's enemies, the Lusignans. So Richard had to sort it out himself.
I don't remember who his people are, Tiberius. Oh my god, I almost just knocked that shit up. Tiberius D. Oh yeah, I've been on a panel with them. I haven't talked to him since like April. At least on Discord. I think he stops by every once in a while. Somebody asked me to be in a panel, but it was like, I want to. Never mind, sorry. I've been taking a break from panels, but after the holidays, I might be more interested in doing some. I just find it annoying because I want to avoid so many people. Like I don't want to talk to like fucking um Grace's dad or whatever. And I have some other people I don't want to ever see, so I have like to be like oddly careful about that shit. And it's like, ugh, I don't know. I gotta figure out a way to go about it. Anyways, sorry.
They made it could ransom them to Saladin, but Conrad would do nothing that would help Richard, who was allied with Conrad's enemies, the Lusignans. So Richard had to sort it out himself. They made a deal with Saladin that he would buy them back. Richard even generously agreed that Saladin could pay in installments. But on the appointed day, Saladin simply didn't pay. And then he continued to stall. Everyone knew that Saladin was trying to slow down Richard's advance, while Saladin raised more men. Skirmishes started between the two forces, and a rumour spread that the Christian prisoners in Saladin's camp had been executed. So finally, after being manipulated for days on end, Richard marched his prisoners out of the city and
glad that we have, as a society, moved past, Muslim Christian hate. Glad none of that is still an issue. Literally 1,000 years ago, this shit was like this. God, I fucking hate religion.
Executed them. There were maybe 3,000 of them. Of course, Richard had been executing his captives since he was a wee lad, and this was how things were done. When Saladin captured the Templars and Hospitallers after Hattin, he had had them all executed too. There's no doubt that Richard would have
really good fucking way of going about shit. Jesus Christ.
Preferred the money, but if Saladin had decided not to pay, then what else was he going to do? He couldn't keep them, they couldn't possibly feed them for one thing, and they couldn't release thousands of soldiers to take up arms behind them and get nothing in return. The Muslim chroniclers wrote that Richard should have just sold them into slavery instead. Slavery was widespread there, and it seemed a simple solution to them. But although they had no real moral objection to it, the 12th century Europeans didn't tend to do that sort of thing, so they were killed instead. Problem solved, they marched on. South to Jaffa and the great battle of the Third Crusade. This would be Richard's finest hour. Now, the siege experts of Western Europe were marching into open country where they would face the elite Turkish cavalry. This was a new kind of warfare for Richard, and it would be his greatest test yet. During the march from Accra to Jaffa, the massed mounted...
Accra to... where? Jaffa? Where's that? I guess somewhere?
Archers swooped in repeatedly to pepper the Crusaders with arrows. They surrounded Richard's army on three sides as they marched and rode slowly down the coast. From a distance, the enemy arrows lacked the force to penetrate the armour of the man-at-arms, so it was observed that the Crusaders walked in the baking heat with arrows sticking out all over them. The arrowheads penetrating the mail hauberk but sticking into the padded gambeson beneath. There were so many arrows falling on them that it wasn't worth stopping to pull them out. They couldn't stop. Baha ad-Din had this to say: I saw some of the Frankish foot soldiers with from 1 to 10 arrows sticking in them and still advancing at their usual pace without leaving the ranks. One cannot help admiring the wonderful patience displayed by these people. But men died on the march. Horses died too. Richard rode up and down his lines, ordering his men to hold their ranks and carry on. Discipline was all important if they were to survive these assaults. So the two...
When does the Kingdom of Heaven movie happen? Isn't that like around this time period? Hold on. Sorry, I'm getting cold, sorry.
Two armies marched in parallel down the coast. Richard knew it was only a matter of time before the
Merlin? That's... What, like the 500s or something like that?
enemy attacked in force. Probing attacks sometimes broke through, but the Crusaders kept their discipline as they marched from water source to water source. Sometimes Richard had to charge into the fighting himself. Day after day, they marched on. But Richard's leadership, his personal authority, kept them together through earth scorched by the enemy and by the sun, until they reached the forest of Arsuf. On the other side, across their path, Saladin had arrayed his vast forces for battle. The Crusaders...
Why are they doing this again? Just because that one guy from the Pope like really fucked up everything, huh?
were outnumbered and they could not advance without a fight. Richard assembled his army in a tight, close formation and prepared for the tidal wave. In the middle of the morning, on the 7th of September...
Wait, what?
Without a fight.
10,000 infantry, 1,200 heavy cavalry, 25,000 cavalry. A lot of horses.
Richard assembled his army in a tight, close formation and prepared for the tidal wave. In the middle of the morning, on the 7th of September 1191, thousands of Turkish, Arab, Syrian and Egyptian horsemen charged into the attack. Their hooves thundering against the bone-dry earth, their drums and trumpets sounding as their colourful pennons streamed against the blue sky. But the Crusaders stood firm. Assaulted from all sides, the knights begged to be allowed to be released in a counter-attack, but Richard said no. For hours,
Good question, Milrith.
said no.
Well, like Arabian, like aren't like horses like native to that region or no? Horse, the genetics, taxonomy, evolution, all species referring to modern times. So horses are Russian. Mongolia had a shit ton of horses, so I mean it's the right region. But so I think that modern areas that that they're saying that horses come from, the wording, it makes sense that they would have a shit ton of horses because that's where they're from.
While the enemy charged in over and over, shooting their arrows, throwing their javelins. The heat grew unbearable and men collapsed where they stood as the dust rose and the drums and cymbals crashed. Horses were killed in their hundreds before they ever took a step in the charge that was surely to come. But Richard knew he had to time this to perfection. If he charged his knights too soon, the enemy would simply retreat, melt away from the weight of the charge, and the knights would come to a stop out there, exposed and vulnerable to a swift counterattack. Only when the swift horsemen were crowded so tightly that they could not escape would such a charge have any hope of success. Great lords begged him, weeping, to order the charge, falling to their knees in the dust before him, covered in the blood of their horses, and still Richard said no. And then the leaders of the Hospitallers could take no more, and they ordered their knights to charge. But they were too early. No one else was ready. Their lines flattened the Crusader infantry in front of them, slowing down their charge and sending that part of the line into disorder. Unsupported, it was doomed to failure. Their rash action, their failure of nerve, was about to lead to another great defeat like Hattin. But Richard did not hesitate. Seeing the chaos unfolding, he ordered the attack. The Crusaders' trumpets sounded and their drums hammered and the vanguard, the rear guard, the main body, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Bretons, Angevins, Poitevins all charged together into the packed ranks of the enemy horsemen and infantry. To the sound of thundering hooves and the clashing of iron, the Crusaders smashed the enemy down and trampled them underfoot.
Why? I'm a little confused on the battle plan there. So they had to like hold the line. But what? But was it like a thing where it was they tried to do in overwhelming numbers on the other end with all the cavalry? But like I'm trying to imagine this battle in my head and it doesn't make any sense. Like, did they have like ramparts and shit? Like, they have like that image earlier on this. Templars, so B. I don't know where that is. Whatever this is, the
attack.
Did he move it?
Their hooves thundering against the bone.
Okay, so we had English and Normans, fucking normies, down here at E. D is the Poitevins, goes here. F is the Hospitaller. We're up here. I assume it's all of this? Turkish skirmishers, HH.
Dry earth, their drums and trumpets.
Oh, right, they're fighting. It's this. Solomon's main army is I. So they have the skirmishers, the Turkish ones, and then we have A being, I don't know. Double A is Crusader infantry and baggage. This is like the... It looks like there's like a river here or something. So, I'm very confused about this battle. They wanted all of their units in the same place because then they wanted to unleash the Crusaders, but like, were they just like so superiorly armed that like, I don't know. I don't get it.
Hammered, and the vanguard, the rear guard, the main body, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Bretons, Angevins, Poitevins all charged together into the packed ranks of the enemy horsemen and...
Okay, well, what were you guys doing earlier? Just sitting around?
Infantry. To the sound of thundering hooves and the clashing of iron, the Crusaders smashed the enemy down and trampled them underfoot. Hundreds were killed in this single great charge, but now the Crusaders were exposed, and the enemy who had fled were stopped by their lords, turned, reorganised and sent back in a vast counterattack on the exposed Crusaders, and the battle had turned again. But Richard had not committed all of his forces in his first charge. He held his enormous English and Norman forces in reserve. Once the enemy were engaged again, he now led them personally in a counterattack of his own, first with his lance and then with his sword. Richard led the English and Normans in charge after charge.
Armies.
Quote, "There the king, the fierce, the extraordinary king, cut down the Turks in every direction, and none could escape the force of his arm. For wherever he turned, brandishing his sword, he carved a wide path for himself, cutting them down like a reaper with his sickle." End quote. It was a bloody, terrible day, and it was a great victory for Richard. His finest hour, really.
Casualties. Wait, they had 25,000 people, so it was they lost 700 people. Wait, what? They had, how? They had, what, like 12,000 people? And they had 25,000 people. And they lost what? I guess maybe this is why you shouldn't put all of your, you shouldn't just have one class. You had to diversify your army. I don't know.
Saladin.
They said it was like all cavalry on the other end.
The myth of his invincibility forever destroyed limped away into the night. "We were all wounded," wrote Bahar ad-Din, "either in our bodies or in our hearts. This battle, the Battle of Arsuf."
Vampire Crusader. What the fuck? Well, this might make sense why this is confusing, because this is the channel's name, Dan Davis, and he named his book Vampire Crusader.
Is in my novel Vampire Crusader, by the way. If you like that sort of thing, then you should check
Oh, right, he does fantasy stuff. Never mind, sorry.
it out. The link is in the description. 3 days later, Richard's forces marched into Jaffa, retaking it for the Crusaders. This was a vital port for anyone who wanted to attack and hold Jerusalem. But Richard did not have the forces or supplies to march inland to besiege the Holy City because Saladin would be attacking his supply lines. He might have won a great battle, but this was still enemy territory. Richard wanted to march on to Ascalon to take it before Saladin demolished it, but at a conference of the commanders, everyone preferred to stay.
Actual photo. Oh, this is true. This is actually a historically accurate photo. Nope.
This
And fortify Jaffa. He was the leader of the army, but Richard was not the king of these men, and he could not rule by decree. Richard reluctantly gave way. Jerusalem seemed so close, so ripe for the taking, but the bickering lords of Outremer were too preoccupied with their own squabbling. There were endless.
Hey, maybe if your boy would have stayed, because it seems like he was doing some diplomacy. The French king.
Fights between them
Could have been
over the
helpful.
Crusader states, cities and fortresses. They did actually march on Jerusalem eventually, but there was
How many times are we gonna
appalling
use that
weather,
image?
heavy rain and violent thunderstorms, making a sea of mud for miles around. Still, the soldiers wanted to go on, all the way, invest in a siege and
Yeah, I'm sure the soldiers were the ones that wanted to go on.
storm the walls. It might even have worked, but the leaders knew that they could not hold the city for long, and in the end, when they were so close they could smell the stink of the holy city, Richard ordered the retreat. And now Richard got word from England. His little brother John was making trouble back home, and Philip, despite his oaths, was preparing to invade
I love this. So you did this for absolutely no reason.
Normandy. Richard had to go home. He just had to. Still,
Yeah, we have crusades at home, like literally.
there was yet another battle between Richard and Saladin. During an ambush on the king's small force, at one point Richard led just 10 knights in an attack on
Is this Skyrim music?
a force of enemy horsemen, which was described by a chronicler, quote, "The king was a giant in the battle, and was everywhere in the field, now here, now there, wherever the attacks of the Turks raged most fiercely. On that day his sword shone like lightning, and many of the Turks felt its edge. Some were cloven in two from their helmet to their teeth. Others lost their heads, arms, and other limbs, lopped off at a single blow. He mowed down men as reapers mow down corn with their
I mean, let's think about like an actual like battle. Like nobody sees anything that happens. That's like such a ugh. Like you can't tell what the fuck's happening.
sickles. Whoever felt one of his blows had no need of a second. He was an Achilles, an Alexander, a Roland." End quote.
Yeah, nice
The
glazing.
great soldier was laid low by another bad sickness, but eventually he set off for home. Had he stayed a few more months, as he very well might have done, he would have been able to exploit the chaos caused by Saladin's death, and no doubt he would then have taken the holy city. But by the time Saladin died,
Yeah, and did nothing with it. Like what the fuck?
Richard was a prisoner in Germany. So he sailed home
What?
starting in October 1192, and in early December he was approaching Venice. If he'd kept making good time like that, he would have reached home while everything he'd set up was still working. John had been scheming and plotting, but he hadn't really done anything that bad yet. There was no crisis. Richard's careful organisation of his lands had worked well, and he remained in regular communication with everyone as far as the system of...
What's up with these families just fucking hating each other? I guess because they like, what, they get their lands and then they just don't talk anymore? Because I guess that makes sense. You like, hey, you get this shit and then you just never talk? Like, are you even like family at that point?
Of messengers would allow. But it was winter now, and the seas were too rough to sail, and so Richard decided to rush through Germany on the quiet. With a small party, he travelled along the coast in galleys, but they were wrecked on the Dalmatian shore. It was okay though, because Richard had allies in various parts of Germany. He just had to get there, and to avoid arousing notice, he decided to disguise himself and his men as pilgrims. Now, this was a party of grizzled, war-hardened, veteran noblemen, led by the incredibly tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, most famous hero in Christendom. And throwing a pilgrim's robe around your silk doublet and bejewelled sword isn't the most cunning of disguises. No one knows exactly what happened, but it's clear they immediately aroused enormous suspicion. And yes, communications were slow in those days, but the local lords knew that...
My guess is you'd probably get got for the way you speak.
The King of England was travelling home from the Crusade and had suddenly dropped off the radar. You didn't have to be Roger Bacon to work this one out. So just before Christmas 1192, a mere 50 miles from friendly territory, Richard was surrounded by agents...
Oh yeah, he's like mad at him, right? Because they took down his... He put up his flag and like, he's like, what? This is... You're not good enough to have the flag? So then they took down his flag. So now he's mad.
Agents of Leopold of Austria. His feelings had been hurt back at Acre, and he was greedy for the riches that Richard had rightly denied him there. The king was locked in a castle built atop a rocky slope over the Danube. Now, as a crusader, Richard was under the protection of the church, but laws and customs don't mean anything if those with the power to ignore them choose to do so.
Wow, what a hot take.
Leopold, frightened that someone more powerful would snatch his prize, quickly sold Richard to Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor.
What? When did we skip the... Last Henry I heard of was 3.
Christendom was appalled by it. The Pope excommunicated Leopold, but he didn't care. He was going to be rich now. He could buy absolution if he needed it. Well,
what a
so
German thing to do.
Richard's enemies acted quickly to take advantage of the situation. They even launched an invasion of England that was swiftly beaten off by hastily assembled levies. In his captivity, Richard conducted himself with dignity. At one point, he was in effect put on trial at the imperial court and accused of all kinds of crimes in the Holy Land, like oath-breaking, plotting to kill the emperor's allies, and other jumped-up, baseless charges. Envoys from King Philip were there to witness it, and also to formally, publicly declare that all agreements Richard had had with Philip were now voided.
No! They're back to the enemies! I want them to get back together as homies.
Basically, they were saying that Philip was now going to invade Richard's lands and take it all for himself.
Idiot.
These lords, kings and emperors were a bunch of vile schemers with no honour among them. But even Philip's court poet, an eyewitness in the delegation that day at the imperial court, could not help but admire the only truly noble man amongst them all, the royal prisoner. Quote, when Richard replied to these charges,
by the way, I'm pretty sure he's like on track like a rapist.
He spoke so eloquently and regally, in so lion-hearted a manner, that it was as though he had forgotten where he was and the undignified circumstances in which he had been captured, and imagined himself to be seated on the throne of his ancestors at Lincoln or at Caen. End quote. Somehow, it worked. Richard's speech was so brilliant that the lords of the Holy Roman Empire were moved to tears. Public
Yeah, that didn't happen.
opinion, or at least lordly opinion, was swayed by Richard's performance, and the emperor dropped his accusations and instead praised Richard, giving him the kiss of peace and promising to bring...
That's what I like to call a black tank top moment, where it's like just complete ego, like there's no fucking way that actually worked out that way.
About a reconciliation between him and King Philip, and then he demanded 100,000 marks for the ransom. Richard may have been locked up, but even now you can sense the man's immense energy and unshakable spirit. There were reports, for example, that Richard was playing practical jokes on his guards.
Well, he writes like fiction. He said he writes like historical fiction, so maybe like he's just, you know, made a weird connection to the dude.
And getting them terribly drunk. The nobles of England and all his lands were asked to come up with as much money as they could, quickly. Of course, the more they paid, the more royal favour they were buying, and so they did it with as much enthusiasm as they could afford. And a hefty temporary tax was raised on income and movable property. They also raided the church's silver and gold plate. When he heard that Richard was going to be released, Philip sent a warning to John in England. He said, "Look to yourself.
I think it'd be interesting if we watched a thing on Philip. Like, just see like two different perspectives. Let's see if I can find a video.
Devil is loose." Despite Richard apparently being brought so low, and despite Philip having had such a huge advantage in attacking and taking many of his rivals' castles during his captivity, despite Philip being his overlord on the continent and John being in command of England, it's clear that they were still desperately frightened of him. So frightened, in fact, that they put their money together and offered 150,000 marks to buy Richard. Or, if the emperor preferred, they would pay him 100,000 marks to keep Richard locked up in Germany for another campaigning season. Or they would pay £1,000 per month for every month he was locked up, for as long as the emperor wanted to keep him. You can
Wait, which Philip was he? I thought he was the second. But I keep getting Spain. France? Jesus fuck. It's the fourth?
sense their desperation, can't you? Richard's allies in the Empire forced the Emperor to stick to his word, and then, after more than a year, Richard was finally free, and now his enemies would pay. One of his enemies, Leopold of Austria, promptly had a riding accident. His horse crushed his foot, and it turned...
That's what we said earlier. It's either horse-related incidents or, like, diarrhea.
and black. No one was brave enough to perform the necessary amputation on their prickly lord, so Leopold eventually tried to do it himself with a bit of help. He held an axe over his shin and he ordered a servant to whack it with a mallet. After 3 blows, the limb was finally severed, but it was too late. The sepsis got him and he died in agony. Clearly, God had punished him for his actions. But it was down to Richard to deal with his brother John. Amazingly, John had spread rumours that Richard had died and he was calling himself king. Even when Richard arrived in England in...
Is this what Richard was saying? Richard was saying like and subscribe?
1194, John's men held on to the castles that he had taken in his own name. Richard actually stormed Nottingham Castle, leading the assault himself when he was seriously under-armoured. This attack was repulsed, but they captured some John loyalists, and the next day they hanged them in sight of the defenders in the castle. When they were finally convinced that Richard had actually returned, they surrendered. Richard initiated legal proceedings against those lords who had gone against him, reorganised everything in England, and set off to defend Normandy from the French invasion. He was never to set...
Wait. The French are invading again? You know what? We need to bring that back. We need to bring back the good old days where England is fighting France again. Fuck it.
...foot in England again. But then he didn't need to. He'd restored order and everything was working properly again under the administrators he set in place. However, his holdings on the continent were at enormous risk of being lost, and that's where his treacherous brother was. Richard could have punished John severely, but he didn't. When John came to Richard in Normandy, he fell at his feet and...
Wow, you can just be like, JK. Not a lot of high stakes for them, huh? You're just like, okay, I'm losing the war. Mom! Or, brother! I'm just kidding, stop! And they're like, alright, it's fine.
And begged forgiveness. That
I'm
forgiveness
like, on the... And you pan to the side and you just see like a gigantic line of corpses.
was given at once, but with words of deep contempt.
Talk about privilege, right?
This is what Richard said, looking down at his grovelling brother. Don't be afraid, John. You are a child. You have got into bad company, and it is those who have led you astray who will be
Nice cope.
punished. John was 27 years old. Some historians have called Richard arrogant. Others temper this judgment and observe that his greatest fault was his overconfidence. He acted as if he was indestructible, as if he was destined for greatness, and
I think is that Patrick Stewart? That is, right? Oh, number.
a long life, and nothing could stop him, not enemy, arrows and swords, or treachery and scheming. Then again, he'd been in countless battles. I have mentioned barely any of them, and he'd been laid low by severe illness many times, and he'd been locked up by his enemies, betrayed by his brother, and here he was, the momentum immediately back in his favour as soon as he is back on the scene. It's no wonder he was confident. He had a realistic view of his own remarkable abilities. Of course, this recklessness would ultimately lead to his early death, so there is that. But the war against Philip did indeed turn in Richard's favour. The contrite John had gone over to his brother along with all his forces, and they retook the towns that had been lost. Fortress after fortress, castle after...
What? Wait. Oh, by... What's new?
The castle was attacked and taken or
Boy?
demolished. From Normandy, he marched to Aquitaine, all the while trying to bait Philip into a battle that would decide everything. Richard wanted that battle more than anything, but Philip repeatedly refused to give it to him. Once, the two armies almost engaged when Richard cut off the French army's progress, but Philip immediately turned and marched away. Even then, Richard caught up with the rearguard, captured the siege engines, and then the whole French army disintegrated as it fled in panic from Richard's forces. Richard himself intended to capture Philip, and they charged after the fleeing king for hours.
That's the real story I'd want to tell if I was like writing this story about like a fictional version of this. Like, oh, I want to write the story about their friendship because it's like the fucking Magneto, Professor Xavier type of shit.
Changing tired horses almost without stopping, but Philip got away. His wagon train, however, did not. He lost his finest horses, his royal tents, and a huge amount of his treasure. Richard also captured the French archives.
Oh my god. Imagine living in like a real city.
royal tent and a huge amount of his treasure. Richard also captured the French archives, including the documents naming the lords who had been willing to betray Richard.
And that's from a movie, it's joking.
It was another stunning victory, and over the next few years, Richard doggedly regained the lands that had been taken from him and extended his influence further.
Okay, spoiler, what the fuck?
It was not all plain sailing. Once, he was shot in the knee by a crossbow bolt, a foreshadowing of what was to come. Also, he built his famous fortress, Chateau Gaillard. That means saucy castle. It was a vast undertaking, built in a strategically critical part of the country. He built himself a palace at the site down by the river where he lived for the last 2 years of his life. Opposite the palace, he laid out a new town.
Well, I assume that didn't go well.
And above it all, on the 300-foot limestone crag, was where he built his magnificent castle. As the world's foremost expert on siege warfare, he designed it himself, and he was there directing operations for the 2 years of its construction, driving the workmen on, day after day. They finished in 2 years what would have taken a decade anywhere else. Chateau Gaillard was not intended to be merely an impenetrable defensive structure. Richard intended to...
Wait, what is it supposed to look like? Chateau Gaillard. Wow, I spelled that so wrong in so many ways. Right fucker. What's it supposed to look like? One. Maybe this is what the Red Keep was based off of, because it kind of looks like it. We're still doing the thing. Have like these inner courtyards. This is how the Red Keep's designed. So probably inspired by this.
To use this place as the jumping off point for his conquests of French territory. He continued to fight almost continuously and again came close to killing or capturing Philip in a skirmish. Richard led a charge against a numerically superior enemy. We ourselves unhorsed 3 knights with a single lance. He wrote this in a letter. This is the royal we. He's talking about himself. We ourselves unhorsed 3 knights with a single lance and have them prisoner. End quote. As the French knights fled in panic, a wooden bridge collapsed under their weight and 20 of them drowned. Humiliated, once again, King Philip himself had to be dragged out of the river before he drowned.
I feel like they're both just slandering each other.
In his armour. But Philip's constant politicking, his ceaseless scheming and bribery and promises to those who would rebel against Richard finally paid off. In March 1199, Richard led his troops in a siege to a rebel viscount's castle at Châlus-Chabrol. At dusk on the evening of the 26th of March, Richard ordered his men to press on with their assault. This was a pathetically small and weak castle. It had no...
Wait, what was it called?
On the evening of the 20th March 1199, Richard led his troops in a siege.
Châlus-Chabrol. Okay. Châlus-Chabrol. Chabrol. Apparently I'm allergic to it. Okay. What was this supposed to look? It's literally just like this one tower. Dude, can you imagine? Does this look like some baby bitch shit? Like literally like one tower. Like a building and a tower.
To a rebel viscount's castle at Châlus-Chabrol. At dusk on the evening of the 26th of March, Richard ordered his men to press on with their assault. This was a pathetically small and weak castle. It had no hope of holding out against the veterans, and the 40 men and women inside would surrender at any moment.
40?
The story goes that there was a single crossbowman still shooting from the ramparts. So ill-equipped was he, this commoner used a frying pan for his shield. Every now and then he would load and shoot
I mean, might as well.
down at the attackers. Richard watched from behind his men. When the crossbowman aimed a bolt at Richard, the amused king applauded the man's absurd confidence. However, this meant he was a fraction late in raising his shield.
Oh, no, it's not Patrick Stewart. It's fucking... I slapped her. What the fuck? He used to play Bond, whatever.
And the bolt penetrated the king's shoulder. Acting as if nothing was wrong, so as to not alarm his men, Richard strolled nonchalantly into his tent, where he angrily grabbed the shaft and tried to yank it out. All he succeeded in doing was breaking the shaft and leaving the iron head inside his shoulder. When the surgeon arrived, he had to cut very deeply to extract it. Bandaged, Richard now lay in his tent to recover, drinking and sleeping with women while the castle fell. But when the gangrene set in, he knew what it meant. He'd been a soldier since he was 15 years old, and now he was 41, and he'd seen this happen to countless men before. He set his affairs in order and wrote to his mother, asking her to come to see him immediately. As he was dying, he had the crossbowman brought before him. In a last chivalrous act, he gave the man 100 shillings for serving his lord so faithfully. Richard's heartbroken men were not so forgiving, because as soon as Richard died...
Okay, supposedly this was like a 10-year-old boy, by the way. Or like, not 10-year-old, but like a child.
The crossbowman was flayed alive.
He had a lot of rebels with him. Because I also read that part, according to the Wikipedia at least. He, after he died, he had not rebels, sorry. He had a bunch of mercenaries with him. And the mercenary guy, I was like, nah, fuck you, I'm gonna flay you.
I've had all these comments on my channel, mostly under my King John video, asserting that Richard was a worse king than John. Amazingly, some say that Richard was the worst king of England, the worst of all. Some people seem to think that...
Well, he didn't even seem like he was doing anything there. Alright, I get it. I want to see this from Henry's side. Wait, did I not open that thing? I'm a little worried about that one getting clapped. Hold on. The king who kidnapped the Pope? What? Fuck, I want to see it from his perspective. Maybe our boy here will have a better...
Brought to you by Morning Brew, a free daily email newsletter with the latest business news, but in a fun way. Click the link in the description.
What? What is this link? Raiding super soldiers? My eye.
A super soldier is a fictional concept combatant genetically modified for superior physical or behavioral attributes, a concept you'll be familiar with if you've read a single comic book from the last 30 years. But did you know that this idea was realised with the Potsdam Giants, an 18th century infantry regiment that was recognised by Charles Darwin
Yeah, but they got small ass feet.
as the only case of intentional selective breeding of humans. The Potsdam Giants were afforded high salaries and preferential treatment, but despite this, many lived miserable lives. In 1713, Frederick William I became King of Prussia, a notably frugal...
What? I feel like I'm not getting enough information here.
Some preferential treatment, but despite this, many lived miserable lives. In 1713, Frederick William I became King of Prussia. A notably frugal person, William did away with many of the luxuries his father had enjoyed as king, and instead set about expanding the Prussian army. During his reign, the Prussian army went from a force of 38,000 men to
38,000?
83,000 men. You may think setting aside one's personal indulgences for the sake of Prussia's
Huh? No, it's not me. I think it's the neighbor.
interests was a commendable thing to do, but in truth, the military was William's indulgence, and nowhere is this more obvious than Prussian Infantry Regiment No. 6. The regiment, which also came to be known as the Giant Guard of Potsdam, or the Longfellows, was comprised of taller than average soldiers.
I don't really think that there's any proof that being tall is like particularly beneficial. I think actually if we look at like the Vietnamese soldiers, the fact that they were able to fit into such insanely small spaces was a boon in guerrilla warfare. What was everyone so obsessed with? I guess everyone's been a height queen forever.
You had to be at least 6'2" to enlist in this regiment, which is fairly tall by today's standards, but at the time would have been freakishly tall. The king himself was only about 5'3", making him a little
Fucking manlet.
manlet in the world of today. The king was enamored with
Dark king, literally.
these big boys, and as they
I think that he just found them hot. I think this is just a weird fetish thing.
served him directly, the job came with certain benefits. Firstly, they were paid handsomely, and the taller you were, the more you were paid.
Stop! This is where high heels were born.
They were dressed in a fine regal uniform with a 45cm grenadier cap.
Dude, this is some gay behavior. This is some, like, I just like looking at tall, jacked man behavior.
That further pushed their tall stature. They were given the best food and accommodation. They didn't see combat deployment as the king
Do they also share their... Oh, they don't even do in combat, huh?
considered his Potsdam Giants too valuable to throw away. They were also paired with tall women, in hopes that they would produce even taller guardsmen for the future. And yes, this did work. I imagine this type of eugenics was much more agreeable to the targets than the type practiced by the Nazis, for example, but despite all this, many of the Potsdam Giants hated their jobs, to the point some deserted or even committed suicide to escape it. So why is this? Well, firstly, many would have suffered from gigantism, a rare disorder resulting in increased levels of growth hormone. This is typically caused by a tumour on the pituitary gland, and today is often addressed by surgery, as growing too large puts great strain on the organs, leading to terrible pain and discomfort. This surgery didn't exist back then, so these guys would have just...
My guess is it's either like the gay boy thing, and it's not necessarily one or the other directly, but I think it's like when you look at like how Donald Trump acts, for example, he likes to be surrounded by pretty people. Because when you don't necessarily think about how you look at all times. But there is an element, if you're surrounded by pretty people, then it makes you feel like you are pretty. Just because that's what you visually see often. So there's that element that might be a possibility. 2 might be the these are hot boys and I would like to share a bed with them aspect, where it's not necessarily detached from the first one, but it is a different type of vibe where it's more of an actual like sexual fetish or interest in them because you find them attractive. And then the third option, I think, is that they think that that's what other people like. So it's like a display of strength type of thing where it's a, oh, my guards are like super tall and shit. Like, aren't we like super cool? It's like a complete display of like strength to intimidate other people when they, approach you. Similar to the reason a throne exists. A throne exists with like its splendor or whatever is to intimidate other people that, come to treat with you or whatever. I also agree with the gay one. But if we're being realistic, I do think that there's the three actual reasons.
Lived in misery. Now,
Or
not
potential
all the
reasons.
Potsdam Giants would have had this condition, but they were all subject to a pretty crappy life. This is due to King William's unusual obsession
It's also creepy to like kind of to do this. Oh yeah, you have to fuck this tall bitch. It's like, well, I mean, do I like her? It's like, doesn't matter. Gotta do it. It's like, I hate any type of like relationship policing when it comes to who you pick, like, for other people.
with the Giants. He was once quoted as saying, "The most beautiful girl or woman in the world would be a matter of indifference to me, but tall soldiers..."
Okay, this is gay shit for sure. But tall soldiers, they are my weakness. Would love that for you.
They are my weakness. Which is a choice of words I wouldn't use to describe anything unless I wanted people to think my interest was somehow perverse. And some of William's actions indicate that this
Does
was
seem
the
pretty
case. He was very enthusiastic about recruiting more giants. Part of this was the aforementioned breeding program, but he would also try to recruit tall soldiers from other armies or countries. So well known was his interest that foreign monarchs would sometimes supply him with tall soldiers as a diplomatic gift. Farmers would sell tall farmhands to him, and the children of tall parents were earmarked for their
There's no way this guy wasn't a pedophile.
potential to be Potsdam Giants. If these people weren't interested in joining William's regiment, well,
I just feel like if you're that weird about stuff like that, you got some
tough
crazy
shit.
shit.
The tallest known Potsdam Giant was Irishman James Kirkland, who was recorded as standing in at 7'1". Kirkland had found employment in London, serving as a footman to the Prussian ambassador. In truth, the ambassador did not need a footman, and Kirkland was forcibly abducted and taken on board a ship to Prussia. This is called impressment or press ganging, where someone is forcibly taken into military or naval service. And Kirkland was not the only Potsdam Giant
Wait, what? Wait, I'm sorry, what happened?
found employment in London, serving as a footman to the Prussian ambassador. In truth, the ambassador
Oh, so they like did like a recruiting mechanism where they're like, yo, we looking for tall dudes. And like, it wasn't for him. They then like basically kidnapped him to go to be like the guy's sex doll.
did not need a footman, and Kirkland was forcibly abducted and taken on board a ship to Prussia. This is called impressment or press ganging, where someone is forcibly taken into military or naval service. And Kirkland was not the only Potsdam Giant to be recruited like this. While the Potsdam Giants didn't have to fight in battle,
This is like such a fetish thing.
they were subject to the whims and wishes of King William. If the mood took
Like
him,
this couldn't there's no way this couldn't be a fetish thing. Like this is like one hundo. Like this is too much effort.
he could command they be paraded out in front of him, accompanied by the regiment's mascot, a big old bear. Here William
Well, that's not going again. And
would simply look over them and admire them, as a modern-day rich man might
dude, he's fucking creepy as fuck.
do with a fleet of luxury cars. He would do this to impress foreign visitors and dignitaries, but also for his own amusement. If he was sick in bed, William might call for some Potsdam Giants to be brought
Just stand there. Please stand and show me how tall you are.
into his bedroom to cheer him up. He enjoyed personally training and drilling them himself, and he even liked painting them.
Yeah, this is a kink.
Really, they were little more than circus freaks or toys for William's vanity. To directly serve
He
to
definitely fucked some of them.
be admired by the king may have been a source of pride for some, at least those who had joined voluntarily, but even they would soon see the downside to being a Potsdam Giant. King William was so obsessed with the soldiers being tall that at one point it wasn't good enough to just find or create tall soldiers. He wanted to make the soldiers he had even taller. A special rack was constructed for the
Stop.
Potsdam Giants, where they would be tied up and
This is what every straight man thinks that straight women want. Did they just watch this video and assume this is what women want? This is like every fresh and fit fucking talk. This is also really telling considering like who's the one who wants it. It's like a dude.
Stretched. You may be familiar with such a rack, as it's a well-known torture device. William would personally supervise these stretching sessions, although he eventually stopped the practice after a number of giants died during the supposed lengthening. King William was also known for his short
This is the face of a gay man.
temper, which drove him to attack his servants or even his own children with a cane at the slightest provocation. It's unknown if the Potsdam Giants were subject to the same abuse, but seeing as he literally put them on a torture rack, it seems
He's a really interesting character.
more than likely. In 1740,
At least
Frederick
he was a
William
piece of
I
shit.
died at age 51, and his son, Frederick the Great, became king. Frederick the Great did not share his father's enthusiasm for the Potsdam Giants, and saw the 3,200-strong force of highly paid ornaments as a needless expense. Many of the Giants were integrated into other units, and the regiment was downgraded to a battalion. This Potsdam Giants battalion was deployed in battle during the War of Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War. It was here they surrendered after the Prussian army was defeated by Napoleon's French Empire in 1806. The battalion was then disbanded. Charles Darwin made note of the Potsdam Giants in a work describing selection in relation to sex. No race or body of men has been so completely subjugated by other men that certain individuals have been preserved and thus unconsciously selected from being in some way more useful to their
Wait, what? Wait, no race or body of men have been so completely subjugated by other men that certain individuals have been preserved and thus unconsciously selected. I mean, it seems pretty Jesus Christ, conscious, selected, but whatever. Unconsciously selected from being in some way more useful to their masters. Nor have certain male and female individuals have been intentionally picked out and matched, except in the well-known case of the Prussian grenadiers, and in the case man obeyed, as might have been expected, the law of methodological selection, for it is asserted that many tall men were reared in the villages inhabited by grenadiers with their tall wives.
their masters, nor have certain male and female individuals been intentionally picked out and matched, except in the well-known case of the Prussian Grenadiers, and in this case man obeyed, as might have been expected, the law of methodical selection, for it is asserted that many tall men were reared in the villages inhabited by the Grenadiers with their tall wives. So as far as Charles Darwin was aware, this was
Wait, so they were doing the rapes and what?
It's the only case of humans
I-
being selectively bred to create a race of super soldiers, although
That
that
quote
work
was
was
confusing.
published in 1871. The whole idea of human eugenics and the creation of a race of super soldiers was sort of tarnished around the
Again, super soldiers being height related is like kind of dumb because again, that's not like diversity. Not to be too like cringe, but diversity is our strength. In the United States, like that is literally our strength. Because you don't want to have just, oh, tall Jack dude. Tall Jack dude don't do job for everything. There's things that small contortionist Asian man, i.e. like Ocean's 11, is the best person for the job. Stupid to think that.
same time the toothbrush mustache fell out of favour. So maybe we'll have to wait until human cloning becomes widespread till we see something like this again. What do you think? If you enjoyed this video, perhaps you'd like to learn more about the suffering people with gigantism have to go through, you sick bastard. I have a video about the world's tallest man that details just that as well.
Oh, he ended up like selling his skeleton or something because he was like an alcoholic. Because he was constantly in pain, I think. Similar to okay, this is kind of like different, but I wanted to watch this. I don't know this channel, But I didn't know this is what happened. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Chris Kyle. Famously known for, I believe he wrote a book called American Sniper, and that was made into a movie by, or the main character was played by Bradley Cooper. I never watched the movie or read the book, so I'm not particularly familiar with the contents of such. But in interviews, he talked about often about the fact that he was a sniper, specifically in, like, I believe Afghanistan, or Iraq, around that time period. I don't know the exact details, but the thing is, he said he was a Navy SEAL, and he said he loved his job. He absolutely loved it, and if he had the option, he would go back and do it again, which his job was a sniper. So it was literally killing. It was literally killing people and having to see. I'm good, thank you. I mean, okay. Can we give me a hit? Yeah. Sure. Stop! Okay, I'm starting to care less. How long does it take? How long does it take to kick in? Yeah, the poison. Oh, okay. Anyways, sorry. So apparently this piece of shit ended up getting murdered. I didn't know that. I found this out today. I wanted to watch a video on it. This is long. I don't know this channel, so I don't know how interesting this is going to be. But, or if we're going to go through all of it, but we're learning today.
I don't know what's been happening. Don't worry about that right now, okay?
We have a little true crime within our history of
I've been so
autism.
paranoid, schizophrenic all day, I don't know what to even think of the world right now. I don't know if I'm insane or sane. I don't know what's even sane in the world right now.
Hi everyone, I'm Kevin, and this is Just
Hi, Kevin. Jesus.
Thought Lounge. JTL is the true crime channel that delivers serious, well-balanced coverage of the cases that really make you think. This case today brings us to Texas, where in early 2013, two well-intentioned friends picked up a young, troubled ex-Marine. The plan was an afternoon of intended bonding and healing at the shooting range. Chris Kyle, a veteran of the Iraq War and the most—
Oof. And a fucking psychopath. I'm not liking already where seems like it's coming from. But Chris Kyle's like a psycho.
most effective sniper in US history, had made a promise to the ex-Marine's mother that he would do everything he could to help her son. The Marine, Eddie Ray Routh, like Chris and many others, had struggled with post-traumatic stress after serving in the US military. Chad Littlefield, a kind-hearted—
the best tactic possible. You know what? If somebody's struggling with PTSD, you should definitely take them to a space where there's a bunch of guns and loud noises of other people shooting guns. Send them to a place that's similar to a war zone. That seems like a really good idea.
Hearted soccer dad, neighbor, and close friend of Chris's came along for support. No one knows exactly what happened inside Eddie's mind that day, but after only a short time at the range, he turned his gun on his companions. The actions that Eddie took afterwards, some seemingly sensible and others very bizarre, became the source of debate in the prosecution that followed. Eddie claimed he was paranoid. He said he believed in pig-human hybrid assassins.
I mean, who doesn't?
He said he was schizophrenic and he claimed he did what he had to do. But how much of that was true? Let's take a look. Eddie Ray Routh was a good kid. He went to school in Lancaster, Texas, and then later in Midlothian.
Wait, I think I know where that is.
His grades were okay, and he played in Little League and enjoyed football. From an early age,
It's the most military thing I've ever heard.
Eddie had an aspiration to join the Marine Corps. After graduating high school in 2006, this is exactly what he did. He graduated as a private first class and began training in small arms weapon repair. In September 2007, Eddie was deployed to a forward operating base about 60 miles north of Baghdad.
Oh my god, it's a Canadian. You fucking Canucks with your boot.
Where he repaired weapons and
Not
worked
him, the presenter. Again, I'm not familiar with this channel.
as a prison guard for 6 months. He also spent 7 months as an armorer on a ship in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. But it was his final deployment on a humanitarian mission to Haiti in January 2010, following the earthquake that devastated the country, that Eddie would claim had the most impact on him. He told his parents he was responsible for clearing the land of debris, but also victims from the disaster. He spoke of the horrors he witnessed there. When he returned from Haiti, according to his mother Jody and his sister Laura, he was not the same Eddie. He was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps in 2010. He was 23 years old at that time. In late July 2011, a little more than a year after he was honorably discharged from the Marines, Eddie appeared at the Dallas VA, the Veteran Administration Hospital, complaining that a tapeworm, which doctors found did not exist, was eating away at his insides. This is when the VA first diagnosed him as having PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Over the next year,
I would assume, if I can, I guess, that he was clearing away debris from a tragedy that took a while to travel to. So, my guess is there was probably some very fucking maggoty-ass bodies that he probably saw, like, their entrails out with worms in them. So, if I'm trying to at least reason my way into or thinking that he might have, like, had this, like, PTSD tapeworm thing, probably from that. Because PTSD is obviously from something that, you know, happened to you. That's crazy.
and through 2012, Eddie's symptoms grew worse. During this time, Eddie was in and out of the hospital, both voluntarily as well as against his will, as his family tried to cope with his bizarre and increasingly violent behavior. These incidents culminated in an episode on the 19th of January 2013 when Eddie barricaded himself, his girlfriend Jennifer Weed, and her roommate inside their apartment.
Stop her lesson with weed.
Holding first a decorative ninja sword followed by a kitchen knife, he refused to let anyone leave. Police were called in by the roommate, and Eddie was sent to Green Oaks, a private hospital in Dallas. A doctor noted that in addition to suffering from PTSD, Eddie appeared to be in the throes of first-break schizophrenia, a condition that often appeared in early adulthood. These early signs of schizophrenia did not constitute a formal diagnosis for Eddie. Green Oaks was not his treating hospital. On January 21st, he was transferred back into the care of the Dallas VA, who had already diagnosed PTSD. Here, Eddie was prescribed medication and released after 3 days. The VA found that his actions were induced by an alcohol and marijuana binge, coupled with coming off his existing medications. The VA records note that during a follow-up visit 5 days after his discharge, Eddie exhibited no signs of hallucinations or delusions. That was a positive sign and a temporary relief to his family. A week later, Eddie was invited out to the shooting range with Chris Kyle and Chad Littlefield.
We need to get in the car. Yes, ma'am. My brother just came by here. I was at He's now left, but he told me that he's committed a murder. I'm terrified for my life.
Okay, hold on.
Because I don't know if he's going to come back here.
Okay. What's his name and what did he leave in?
His name is Eddie Ralph. Listen, I don't know if he's being honest with me.
I know.
Apparently, like, I'm just really terrified. I don't even know where your police department is. Is it
Okay.
over there?
Over by the
It
highway.
used to be the church.
Yes, ma'am.
It used to be a church.
I'm just going to stay on the
Okay.
phone with you until you get here.
Okay. A lot of dispatchers can get really aggressive because they need you to stay on the phone, you know? I don't know why this stood out to me, but I just find it interesting that I think this dispatcher's doing a really good job of keeping them calm.
Okay. And who did he say he had killed?
Maybe it's a southern accent. It's kind of disarming. Yeah, who he said he killed?
He said that he killed 2 guys. They went out to a shooting range, and he's all crazy. I don't know if he's on drugs or not, but I know that he's been. Let me talk to you. My husband's going to talk to you because I'm so nervous.
He said he killed 2 guys at a shooting range.
Shooting range he was talking about?
He didn't say.
He didn't say, okay.
He was recently diagnosed with PTSD.
Yeah, a lot of times also they'll like over ask questions just to keep people on the phone.
With what?
He's been acting PTSD.
TPSD?
And he's been acting real weird. From that. He was just got out of a mental hospital, actually.
Okay, what hospital did he get out of?
Green Oaks.
It's actually an interesting tactic to think about. Sometimes if somebody's having like, a little bit of an episode even, or like they're going through a traumatic event, I actually kind of unintentionally realized that for myself when I was talking to my mom after my grandfather died. And I didn't want to talk to her at all because I just like didn't like know how to handle the situation. And because like I'm not good at comforting people because I'm like too fucking autistic to do that. Like, well, and it just makes me like really fucking anxious to think about. But when I did talk to her, I did feel better because what I talked to her about was just like really like non-emotional things like, oh, how are you gonna do the ceremony? Like, was it expensive to do it? Like, what's the process that you're going through? Like talking still about the subject, but not talking about it in an emotional way. It was like a very, I don't really know how to describe it directly, but I felt like that was effective and like not having like talking about it, but not being like, oh yeah, now we have to cry and do this whole like emotional thing. Like it was enough, I guess. And I think it was effective for her to just, you know, talk to me, but not not like super serious or like like I was failing to explain what I'm trying to say. But point being, I think it is sometimes helpful to talk about things in a very objective manner, even if they are very emotional, because you're still talking about it. But it kind of lets you distance yourself from it. And it maybe like stimulates some part of your brain that's not that emotional side. Anyways, sorry.
What hospital did he get out of?
Green Oaks.
When did he get out of Green Oaks?
About a week ago.
Chris Kyle and Chad Littlefield collected Eddie earlier that day from his uncle's house.
Collected?
Eddie had never formally met with Chris or Chad before.
Oh,
On that Saturday, the 2nd of February, they picked up Eddie and headed to Rough Creek Lodge, a high-end family and corporate resort which offered, amongst many other outdoor activities, a very fine shooting range.
Again, the dumbest idea I can think of.
The group stopped to eat some burgers on the drive out. They arrived at the lodge at roughly 3:30 that afternoon when Chris popped into the main building to register their presence before driving further out to where the shooting range was located on the vast.
Like, I literally cannot think of a worse thing to do to somebody who has PTSD is take them to a shooting range. Take them out to, like, a Ren Fair or something, I don't know. Like a wholesome activity like that. Like, why, of all places, why the fuck would you pick that?
Property. The group's collection of guns had been unloaded from the back of Chris's truck, a black Ford 350, and several rounds had been fired at the targets. Then, at some point between 4 and 4:30 p.m., Eddie turned his gun on Chad Littlefield and fired multiple shots. He then turned on Chris Kyle, firing from 2 different handguns. He stood quietly afterwards for 1 minute, and then he got into Chris's truck and he drove off. Eddie made a few stops after leaving Rough Creek Lodge. He went back to his uncle's house, then to his sister Laura's, which prompted the 911 call. Eddie even made a stop at a Taco Bell. He expected he would be arrested, so he thought he should have something to eat first. When he returned to his house the second time, it was around 7 p.m. There he was greeted by a heavy police presence. Eddie's neighbor, Jesse Chivera, a police detective, attempted to coax Eddie from the truck. The conversation, a kind of standoff, lasts about 30 minutes in total. The exchange is punctuated with disconnected and bizarre statements, sometimes questions from Eddie. He asks, "Is it voodoo that is upon us? Is this about hell walking on earth right now?" As well as more straightforward statements such as, "I don't know if I'm going insane."
Okay, but we can't let you move right now, Eddie. I'm not gonna move it. I'm gonna sit right here where I'm at. Okay. Don't keep the lights on me. I'll keep my hands closed. Okay. Eddie, why can't we just go talk about this somewhere else? Why do we have to talk about it here? I'm sorry? Why can't you get in the truck with me? Well, you know, there's more than one way to do it, but we need to do it on neutral territory. We need to talk about it, me and you. If you want to talk about it, I'll walk with you over here, but, you know, I need to see that, you know, we can talk about...
Did police put him up to doing this? This seems kind of dangerous if he has, like, a gun.
...this peaceably without anybody be nervous, and that would be you coming out with your hands so we can talk about this thing. Is this about, like, hell walking on earth right now? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but... Hell's walking on earth with us right now.
Telling you, walk over to the house and talk to him because they have his hands up.
Well, what I'm trying to tell you is that I'll walk over here to your house, to your front yard, and my hands will be open, and your hands will be open, and we can talk about this, and we can call your mom and dad on my phone, and you can tell them that you need to see them.
While Jesse attempted to talk sense into his confused neighbor, other officers surrounding the truck were devising a way to capture Eddie from the vehicle. They thought that if Eddie could lower his window, they could approach and incapacitate him with a taser gun.
That's like a really bad idea.
If he rolls that window down all the way, if you hand the phone to him, I think when you snap, yeah, taser.
Okay, say that again, I couldn't hear you.
Okay, you need to get somebody with some...
Why does this audio sound so weird? Oh, my guess is this is courtroom audio. This is probably footage that was shown in the courtroom, which is why it sounds so echoey like this.
You think you can talk him into, you're not going to get in the fucking truck with him and say, hey, you want me to get in the truck with you, but you got to roll the fucking window down so I can look around and make sure there's no threats.
Wait, are you guys like super over this? I feel like nobody's been chatting in a while. Are y'all still here?
Eddie. Okay, I'm sure you're hearing what we're saying, right? Okay, that's why we're talking here, so you don't feel like we're trying to talk behind your back.
They would not have an opportunity to play this out.
Eddie.
Eddie, no.
5 minutes, Eddie. Okay?
Eddie started the truck, he stated something about taking a nap, and then he drove off. Eddie
What?
Led police on a car chase through the suburb of Lancaster heading towards the highway. At one point, a police cruiser T-boned the truck from the right side as captured by the dashcam footage from the vehicle of Sergeant Logan. This does not end the chase, at least not at first. Fluids from the truck appear to spray out onto Sergeant Logan's windshield. As Eddie merged out onto the highway, the truck began to give out. It slowed to a stop and the pursuing officers were able to surround the vehicle. Eddie then emerged from the truck, hands held out, and is taken down by the
Dude, police chases are like my guilty pleasure, where it's like, I fucking love police chases.
police.
Hey, he missed. You shouldn't have, like, you don't want a T-bone. Like, a pit is like, if this is the back, you want to hit them here, because then you get the movement. You don't want to hit them here, because you're just gonna bounce off. I used to watch so much of that shit on Cops or whatever. Is Cops like still like a show?
2 hours after Eddie had driven Chris's truck from the shooting range, an employee drove out and discovered Chris and Chad. Chris was lying face down in front of the deck where he had been firing towards the targets. He had been shot 6 times with a .45 caliber pistol. Chad had been shot 7 times with a 9mm Sig Sauer handgun. The autopsy on Chad would later reveal that he was shot, at least initially, in the back. Chris had dispensed with all of the rounds he had been firing on the range. Both of the friends had loaded pistols on their persons, but in holsters and with their safeties on. Both of the guns used by Eddie Routh had been Chris Kyle's. Eddie waited in the back of a police cruiser following his apprehension on the highway. At one point, after nearly 20 minutes, he appears to begin to fall asleep. Officers speak with him on and off as they prepare to bring him into the station for formal questioning.
I'm noticing a trend where it seems like they keep people in like the car for like an exorbitant amount of time. Then very expensive catastrophes, like if a car delivery trailer loaded with a supercar falls off a bridge, it's like sucks. That's a really specific thing. I think I get what you're going at, but I do not. I'm not saying same thought. I don't know.
Hey Marie, you alright back there? I'm just so nervous about what's been happening in my life today. I don't know what's been happening. Don't worry about that right now, okay? I've been so paranoid, schizophrenic all day, I don't know what to even think of the world right now. I don't know if I'm just insane or sane. I don't know what's even sane in the world right now.
Eddie had told his sister Laura that afternoon while sitting at her kitchen table that he had taken 2 souls that day.
Oh. This is gonna be so like from left field. But speaking of people who did something wrong, I guess. That one guy that the H-bomb video was on Somerton, I guess he uploaded an apology and then took it down.
One of the most incredible occasions in a ship's life is the day it is put to sea.
But I don't want to see a ship failing. I love ships.
Process of taking it from dry dock and getting it into the water is an incredible feat in and of itself. But every once in a while, these ship launches can go horribly.
What? They didn't know the weight capacity? How did this happen?
Wrong, leading to everything from wet spectators to massive amounts of damage, sometimes resulting in the complete destruction of the vessel that had just been built. From the United States to Indonesia, here are 5 ship launches that ended up dry dock. There are some smaller vessels that are built and put to water differently. Most of the time, these smaller vessels are personal boats where customers order and have them delivered.
Okay.
That is the case here when a boat was being delivered after.
Okay, this is 100% the dry dock's fault.
After being recently purchased by a local. However, upon delivery and launch, things did not go off as they usually do. During this launch, the boat was being put into the water using a large crane. Now, this is nothing unusual, as cranes are
2 large cranes.
regularly used for jobs such as this. However, this job was a little bit different, as the water level was well below normal. One crane immediately to the side of the boat was responsible for lifting it and placing it into the water, while another crane in the distance had a line attached which would keep the boat steady, preventing it from turning one way or the other.
Okay.
But as the boat reached a certain distance from the shore, something went wrong, and the crane that was holding it tipped backwards, dropping the boat into the water and nearly...
Wait, the dude like bailed. Do you see that? The dude bailed like immediately.
And the crane that was...
He's like, I can tell what's going on here. I'm out. What a fucking Giga Chad. He's like, I know where this is going. I can't do anything about it. Fuck this shit. This guy like bails.
Holding it tipped backwards, dropping the boat into the water and nearly falling into the water itself.
Yeah, he could feel the top lifting, and he's like, I'm out. Well, you got it in the water, so dumb. Nice!
It was evident that the weight of the boat was held too far from the center of gravity, being the crane. Luckily, the crane's extended arm prevented it from falling into the water. Additionally, if you look closely, you can see the driver escape just before the truck overturns. As for the boat, it took a hard landing and may have been damaged. However, it somehow remained afloat.
I mean, I got the job done.
Large boat launches are dramatic things to see. Believe it or not, though...
What the fuck is this, like, sail-ass boat? Are these supposed to be sails? What's going on here? I've never seen, like, a ship like this.
Not every launch is done in such a way. A few places in the world have a totally different way of putting these huge vessels into the water. Large cylinders are placed underneath the ships and then inflated, allowing it to essentially roll into the water. There is a flaw in this process, though. There's little support, and it's possible for the
Is this San Francisco?
ship to tip onto its side. This is exactly what happened in Jakarta, Indonesia. On this specific day, a shipyard was attempting to launch a Coast Guard vessel by rolling it along the inflatable cylinders into the water. Suddenly, the ship...
By the way, any retard that says that, like, we don't know how the pyramids are built, just...
started to list to the side. As the ship continued backwards, the list became worse, until finally, it crashed onto its side with the front part of the ship still on the land.
Oh. Wanna do something? What game? Absolutely not. I know what type of game it is. Look at it's one of those. Oh shit! My search bar is an owl. Look, it's an owl. My search bar.
Although everything seemed to happen at a slow pace,
Like a yeah, it's one of those survival games. I don't own it. I don't want to buy it. I don't want to buy it. It's one of those things I know you're gonna get bored with like one day. Are you playing with anybody else? It keeps like being suggested to me for like the last like 5 years. Yeah, I know. Hmm. And we can hang out, but I don't want to do that. Is that what you're gonna do? Abby? Let me finish this video.
It was a very dangerous
4 minutes.
situation because there were sailors on board riding the
Yikes.
ship into the water. As the ship tilted to its port
Oh,
side,
no, these
some of
poor
the
guys.
sailors were able to hold on. Others were not so lucky and got thrown into the water below. The men that were left had to jump for it after
Wait, you're also. I don't feel like you're supposed to do that. Like, have people on board?
the ship came to rest. There were a few minor injuries from this incident, but the ship itself ended up being scrapped after the accident.
Nice.
In the grand scheme of things, it's not very spectacular when smaller boats are put in the water. If you really want to see a show, check out the large tankers and cruise ships. These monstrous boats are built on dry land and then launched once they're almost completely built. When these launches happen, it's a pretty big event. Even though the spectators are kept at a safe distance, there are times when it's not quite far enough. In this video, we see that a large cargo ship is still under construction. However, it has reached the point where it is safe to be launched into the water where the construction can be completed. As the audience looks on, the ship slides in and creates a humongous splash. It comes much to the delight of the onlookers. That is, until they realize that the displaced water is rushing straight for them. The wave hits the shore and continues onwards. Although it isn't a big wave, it still has enough force to take a couple of people off their feet.
It doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. This is the most like Tennessee-esque like. What did they forget about? What did you expect?
While a few people ended up tripping and falling in. Near the end of the video, you can see a young family with 2 children, one of them being a newborn. They all escape unharmed, though
that's your problem.
incredibly wet. However, should the parents have not been able to keep their balance, things could have ended in a much different way.
Okay, you don't gotta narrativize.
Failed boat launches aren't only reserved for large ships or yachts. It can also happen with small boats like ski boats. It's rare, but it does happen. It mostly depends on the skill of the person steering the boat. That's precisely what happened in this video. Shot in September of 2014, this video shows a boat that was being launched from a small boat ramp at Lake Havasu in Arizona. The boat had already been in
Wait, Arizona has water?
the water for a small amount of time when the driver wanted to slowly reverse it out into the lake. At first, things seemed
I don't believe his premise to begin with.
to be going very well, but that changed rather quickly. The boat's engines kicked into high gear and sent the boat backwards. Then, the driver corrected his mistake, but overdid it quite a bit, shifting the gear
Nice. I did that once when I was like 14 and my mom let me drive the car for the first time.
forward. The boat then went full speed back up the boat ramp and onto the concrete where it eventually came to a stop.
This is the most divorced man shit I've ever seen. I mean, it's the most Arizona thing I've ever seen, really.
Oh shoot, oh shoot!
Turn it off, you idiot! This is the most GTA thing I've ever seen.
Although it's not known whether
I guess we've all done that in GTA.
or not this accident was due to a malfunction of some sort, the most likely cause is human error. The driver simply did not have much experience operating a boat and, as a result, crashed. Luckily, no one was hurt in this incident. Only the driver's pride. So far, we've seen some examples of ships being launched where people simply end up wet or sustain some minor injuries. However, there was
back in
one
San
ship
Francisco.
launch that ended up causing quite a few injuries. This was during the launch of a ship named the Reuben Lasker. a huge research vessel that was owned and operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Usually, when these large ships are put to sea, they slide along steel rails and fall into the water. But on this day, the rails were not made of steel, but were made of
They were off the rails, some would say.
wood. So when the Reuben Lasker slid and hit the water, the wooden rails burst under the enormous pressure,
This is why engineering is important.
sending a wave of water and huge chunks of sharp wood flying towards the onlookers standing nearby. Even though all the spectators survived, there were some injuries. 2 people sustained cuts to their torsos and arms, while a third person was knocked unconscious when she was struck in the head. It is unknown who made the decision to use wooden slides as opposed to metal ones, but it was an oversight that could have ended with someone dying. Luckily, that didn't happen. For everything we've seen,
Wait, what? Oh, I guess we didn't get a visual of it. I mean, it looked fine from our end, but
thing is for sure. Ship launches have to be precise, no matter how large or small. Even people who are relatively close by should stay very attentive. You never know what could happen. To see another...
Alright, speaking of, fuck, hold on. Gigantic vessels in water? No, it doesn't really make sense. Speaking of large vehicles... Wait, hold on. I think I was, got the first part. Speaking of large vessels that may cause injury if put in water in an irresponsible way, I'm gonna post this person called Airy Love. They've got big ass titties and they seem like they're a lot of fun. So thank you all for being here. This hopefully that joke worked. I'm gonna go hang with Razor. We'll see you tomorrow. Probably a day stream around 3. But if not, it'll be between 6 or 7. But pleasure. She seems cool and we love her. Alright, gonna go ahead and send you guys over. If I can hit the thing. Not spell the name wrong. Alright, thank you all for being here. Have a fantastic night and hopefully and make me seem really cool to Ari.